If folks could take their seats, we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Alyssa Cooper. I'm the chair of the IETF, and in case you're not sure where you are in this hotel, you're in the plenary. So welcome to the plenary here in lovely London. I will say that on one of the first days that I was here for this meeting, end of last week, I was trying to figure out where my next meeting was in the hotel, and walked over to the elevators and was kind of shuffling with my phone, looking at the floor plan, and I figured out, okay, I need to be in the West Wing, which is where we are now, and then realized I actually don't know which wing I am in at the moment. And so I sort of looked up from my phone to see, maybe the wall is going to tell me with a sign which wing I'm in, but of course it didn't. But what I did see on the wall was this sign, and then it became very meta, because I was like, wait a minute, I'm in a sort of maze or labyrinth, if you will, and that guy is also in a labyrinth. And I sort of thought, what is that sign doing here? Like, why am I looking at this guy who's in a labyrinth and I'm in a labyrinth? And it only took a second, but then I realized, of course, that this was part of our dear Secretariat's scavenger hunt to help people familiarize themselves with this venue. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank AMS and all of the Secretariat folks for all the support that they provide to the IETF, and in the very unique way in which they understand our needs and tailor to them. So thank you very much. And, that extends to things like showing up with a leprechaun suit in honor of St. Patrick's Day, which happened on the weekend. In case, for those of you who weren't here, Alexa was wandering around as a leprechaun, as was, I think, Stephanie. And she, as you can see, was not wearing a red lanyard and gave me consent to use her photo in the plenary. So kudos to AMS. Thank you so much for all that you do for the IETF. Today we will have our sort of typical agenda. So welcome to the plenary. We will hear from our one of our hosts at this meeting. Then we'll have brief updates on hot topics. So as people have seen in the plenaries the last couple of years, we have sent out many reports in advance of the plenary that contain a lot of detail about all the things that are going on in the IETF. We're attempting to make the plenary presentations short and to the point, and highlighting just the most current issues for the community. So I will give one of those. We'll have administrative update, an update from the IRTF chair, Allison Menken, hear from the past and incoming NomCom chairs, and we will hear from ISOC about the Jonathan B. Postel Award. Then we'll get a bit of a preview of IETF 102 coming up this summer. We will recognize some folks in the community who are transitioning in their status. And then we'll have the technical plenary, which I'm very excited about the future of internet access. We have a bunch of great speakers for you, and that's a program that the IAB has put together. And then we'll close out the day with the typical open mic sessions. So first, I want to say a huge thank you to our co-hosts for this meeting, Google and ICANN. Thank you so much for your support of the IETF. We really could not have the meetings without the hosts, although we occasionally do. They're just not nearly as good. The host plays a really important role, not just through their financial support, but other logistical and administrative support of the meeting, and so we really appreciate that. And now I'd like to ask Göran to come up to the stage, and we're going to hear from one of our co-hosts, ICANN.
Don't you feel alone sitting up here by yourself? Anyway, thank you. I never have received so many instructions going to any meeting since I started for ICANN. I just want to share with you some of them. My first mission here is to make sure that I don't embarrass my team. Where is my team? Hi, team. Yeah, they also told me be nice and be yourself. That's contradiction in terms, isn't it? And I shouldn't wear a suit and a tie, which most people never seen me have anyway, so I don't know what that, I was actually thinking of wearing a suit and a tie just for that. Thank you. I don't know how much you know about ICANN itself or myself, but I am called the most nerdiest CEO of ICANN ever. I have a background in switching, routing, mobile, telecom, but for the last year I'm now a recovering telecom regulator. So I've seen most things from both sides. But I've never been to an IETF meeting before, so I'm really happy to be here. For me, in a sort of personal way, when people ask me what is ICANN, and I always start with one sentence: ICANN is not the internet. What we may be is the sort of user interface to the internet through the domain name system. But more importantly, we're a member of an ecosystem. And that ecosystem is you, who done the standardization work. It's ISOC, who does the policy arm, the RERs, who are the numbers community. And from the outside, and I'm not supposed to say this according to my share, we're in this shit together. I didn't say that, did I? Thank you for listening. And that's important to me. A couple of years ago, when I was appointed the CEO, I had the pleasure of going to US Congress to meet a guy called Ted Cruz. And one of the things I talked about all the time is in the voluntarily of the system. We do this because it's set up to be voluntarily. We work together because we have to in a voluntarily way. Everybody can sort of walk away and do something different. I don't do this to sell domain names. I do this because I think it's essentially important that the internet stays open and interconnected. I think you have done a great job, all of you, despite all, you even have more acronyms than we have. Yes, you do. You're the winners. But now, for the first time, I also see that the things we do together collectively in this ecosystem is threatened. I can give you one example. There are many legislative proposals and discussions around the world right now, here in Europe, in the US, and other parts of the world, that maybe for the first time ever will have an effect on our abilities to make policies. And there are any discussions, and I don't judge on them or being good or bad. I don't say that that is a stupid idea. But I know that some of them can actually hurt the interconnectivity of internet at itself. And I think that we need to continue to work together. What I heard from this lot this week has been very interesting, and my team has been stopping me for going in or having opinions about technical stuff which I don't know about. That is otherwise what I love to do. But to continue this work together, and hopefully me being here and you coming to us and we can work on issue-based together, we can make sure that what I'm here for, and what I know that many of you are there for, is to make sure that the internet stays open and interconnected. We do our part. I would love to continue to work with you. Thank you very much. I'm going to go down to the
Thank you. Jörn, now you can take back to your community and ICANN the virtues that you've actually experienced of having a plenary in the evening rather than in the morning. First-hand experience. So moving on to highlight a few issues of interest to the IETF community at large. Today I'm going to cover some statistics about participation at this meeting, a new event that we had on Sunday, Hot RFC, a little bit about the side meetings and code lounge experiments that we have continued to run here at IETF 101, an update on the IETF Administrative Support Activity 2.0, IASA 2.0, and just a note about respectful behavior in the community. So first, participant statistics. At this meeting, we have 1,189 people on site, and we have 218 attendees for whom it's their first meeting, so Thank you to all of you for coming for the first time to experience an IETF in person, and thank you to all of those who've been coming for a long time, who've helped those newcomers find their way. If we compare to meetings, our most recent spring meeting, which was last spring, we have more people who showed up here than did in Chicago at IETF 98. If we compare to our most recent European meeting, which was last summer, we had more people show up in Prague than we did here. You can see the country breakdown on the slide. We had the largest fraction from the US, followed by the UK, China, Germany, Japan, and you can see the rest, a fairly typical split for us. Folks from 59 countries have showed up at this meeting. Again, that's kind of somewhere in between the statistics for IETF 98 and IETF 99 last year. Just a word about the hackathon. The participation in the IETF hackathon continues to grow, meeting over meeting. So this was our largest one yet. We had about 220 people participating on site and 20 remote. We had 35 projects, which is substantially more projects than we've had at any prior hackathon. And new for this meeting as well, on Monday night, for those of you who caught it, we had a hack demo happy hour so that all the teams could have a little bit more time to present the results of their work to the community and to engage in discussions with people who are interested in their projects to understand what they got done over the weekend and how it fits into the rest of the work of the IETF. And we're going to continue to experiment with that sort of thing, so if you have feedback about that event or about the hackathon itself, you can always email it to the hackathon list. You can email me, you can email Charles Zeckel, who's been the main driver behind the hackathon. And for planning purposes, we are certainly planning to do the hackathon again at IETF 102, July 14 and 15, the Saturday and Sunday at the start of the meeting week. At this meeting, we also tried a new event on Sunday night, organized by Aaron Falk with support on the ISG from Aaliyah Atlas and Spencer Dawkins. It's called Request for Conversation, otherwise known as Hot RFC. So this was an opportunity for people who wanted to give brief lightning talks to encourage brainstorming, to find collaborators, to advertise their barb-offs, or to just generally raise awareness about some new idea that they have or that they've been working on. And by all accounts, it seems the feedback that we've gotten so far is quite positive. We had 17 lightning talks that were given. We had about somewhere between 80 and 100 people in the room. It ran concurrently with the second hour of the welcome reception. And you can find the proceedings online. All the slides are up there. The ISG is very interested in hearing from the community about what they thought about this, whether we should do it again, what we should change or do differently. So please send that feedback to iesg@ietf.org, or happy to talk about it at the open mic session here as well. And big thanks to Aaron for all his work in helping to organize that. We've also continued our experiment at this meeting with side meetings and the code lounge. So what we've done for side meetings is we've allocated one large room and one small room that people can book in advance for their side meetings. So no more going through your area director to book those slots as long as they are not conflicting with the meal times. Both of the rooms have projectors, and then if you do want to book a mealtime slot, signups for those open up on site. And just a reminder for people who are thinking about using that again in the future, that we do have the IETF meeting rooms policy, which specifies which kinds of meetings can be held as side meetings and which ones are considered corporate meetings that require payment. So it's important to remember the line between those things. The Code Lounge is a portion of IETF meeting room space which has been set aside for people to get together and hack together to continue their activities from the hackathon or just generally do some development work on the side of the IETF meeting. And both of these are still kind of in the experimental stage, so we're continuing to collect feedback about whether people find them useful and refinements that we can make. We changed up the side meeting sign up a little bit so that anybody could sign up this time. Definitely interested in your feedback about these experiments. Now, to the IETF Administrative Support Activity, or IASA 2.0. So IASA is the name that we use to describe the way that we structure the administration of the IETF. That means the meeting planning, the financial planning, the fundraising, and so on. IASA 2.0 is an activity that started in November of 2016 with a sort of project plan that Jari Arko, the previous IETF chair, mailed out to the IETF list. Over the last year, we've had kind of extensive discussion on the IASA 2.0 list and at the IETF meetings about restructuring or refactoring the way that we conduct our administrative activities. There's a bunch of different factors that have led to the current structure being not the best fit as it was in the beginning. And so we've had this conversation about transitioning to a different structure or whether there's things that we can do to improve upon the current situation. Over the last 2 meeting cycles, the group has been considering multiple different legal options for what a new structure could look like, everything from staying exactly as we are, which is as an activity of ISOC, where the IETF does not have its own legal entity, all the way to becoming an independent organization from ISOC to house the administration of the IETF. And yesterday we had a BOF session where we talked in even greater detail about several of these different options that have been considered and about which we had sought legal advice. And what happened in the BOF room is a couple of things. First, by the end of the session, we had rough consensus in the room in favor of creating a limited liability corporation that would be treated as a division of ISOC for tax purposes in order to house just the administrative piece of the IETF. So this doesn't really have anything to do with the standards process and everything that the ISG and the IAB do, and that happens in the working groups and among document authors, but just for the administration of the IETF. And this particular legal structure has a number of values and properties to recommend it, as do several of the others that we considered, but that was kind of where the room landed. And if you want more details on any of this, it's all available on the IASA 2.0 mailing list. We also, in that session, got lots of good feedback about many of the organizational details that we would need to hammer out if we went down this path of changing the administrative structure. So the plan going forward is, first of all, to confirm the HUMs on the list from that session, which is, the mail has already gone out about that. And then to basically take the choice of legal structure, assuming it gets confirmed, and embed that choice in a working group charter, which has also been circulated on the list. And via that mechanism, confirm the sense of the IETF community that this is the direction in which we want to take our legal structure for our administration going forward. The charter for the working group would be to update our existing RFCs that describe all of these administrative structures. And then outside the working group, we would begin working on the actual legal documentation, which we would not write in the working group, since that's not an appropriate venue to do that kind of thing. And these processes would work in parallel. So if you're interested in any of this, please join the mailing list, IASA 2.0. I know that many people are not interested in this, but for some people, it's the choice of administrative structure embodies a lot about the IETF and how we operate as a community. And so I really wanted to just take a few minutes of your time to raise awareness about this in case it's something that people haven't been following. I also wanted to just take a moment to touch on respectful behavior in our community. So on the slide, you can see we have a list of our existing policies that govern behavior in the IETF. We have guidelines for conduct, which is encoded in a BCP. We have an anti-harassment policy put forth by the ISG a couple of years ago. We also have anti-harassment procedures, which created our ombuds team, who's here on site. And the newest policy of these is the IETF meeting photography policy that the ISG put forth just before the meeting after consultation with the community, and which has been supported by, as you can see, some folks wearing red lanyards at this meeting with their choice to not be photographed as an individual when not operating in a leadership capacity, and white lanyards for the rest of the crowd. So you can take a minute and you can kind of peruse the policies, familiarize yourself with them if you haven't before. But perhaps more important than reading the policies, I think it's important for everybody to think just for a minute about what happens in this community and how much it is derived from the individual choices that we all make. So this community is really made up of, it is what we make it. And if you want to be treated respectfully, then you need to treat other people respectfully. And I think sometimes that gets a little bit lost, like it's really easy to get really amped up about whatever technical topic you're discussing, or if you're happen to be discussing, say, one of these policies on a mailing list, it's easy to get lost in the details and get overheated about those things. And I think it's important for all of us to kind of take a check sometimes and think about, are we conducting ourselves in the best manner possible to achieve the goals of the IETF? So I wanted to take a moment to do that today, and hopefully that's been helpful. We have a whole bunch of other topics that are covered online in the report that we sent out to the community at the end of last week. So other experiments that we're running, information about appeals, which we haven't had any of in the last cycle, status update about how we're trying to handle some DMARC issues with IETF mailing lists, and lots of other reports from other parts of the IETF that you can find online, in addition to the blog where we're regularly providing narrative content about what's going on in the IETF. And with that, I will turn it over to administrative hot topics. So, Beyonce, if you're come up to the mic, and Portia Lynn Stanley. So now I guess it's you, because you have to explain it.
No, I don't.
You want me to do it?
Yes.
Okay. So just to explain why the name Beyonce is on the slide. So the IAOC, which is the Administrative Oversight Committee of the IETF, doesn't elect its chair in the IETF week until Tuesday morning. So yesterday morning was when we elected the new chair of the IAOC. And yet the slides for this presentation need to be built, eons in advance in order to make sure that they're all correct and that the full IAOC has the opportunity to review them and get every detail right. And so in the initial versions of the slides that you're about to see, the IAOC chair was listed as Beyonce because we didn't know who it could be. And the thought of it actually being Beyonce was pretty exciting for some of us. So we thought, why not put that in there? And then after we did the election and our new chair, Andrew Sullivan, was elected, I dared him to leave it in on his part of the slides, and he said yes, and so I left it in on my part of the slides as well. So, over to you, Portia.
Alyssa is going to learn not to dare me to do things.
Thanks, Alyssa. I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that I was not trying to be Beyonce. Okay. So, could you show, is it just in here? Okay.
Oh, I think it's Andrew's first. Oh, but IRTF update was not. Send me rest of us. Is it a different deck? Oh, okay. Let's see. Sorry, I thought it was one deck. Good, there you go.
Okay, so I'm here to thank our host again, and Google and ICANN, our co-hosts. We really thank you for everything that you've done to help put on 101. There's no way that we could have done all of this work without you, and we appreciate everything that you've done for us this week. The slide has all of our sponsors that, of course, we really appreciate your work. BT, British Telecom, is our connectivity sponsor. Facebook Facebook and Oracle are silver sponsors for us. And Google, ICANN, and the Hilton Metropole are the sources for our welcome reception. So thank you. And of course, in the background, there's so many people who are working to, who come into the into the venue so early to make sure that everything is going as it should, and also just working behind the scenes. We've got our code sprint and IETF data tracker enhancement, our volunteers for that. And for some reason, the slides are going faster than I am. And next for the hackathon, thank you so much to Cisco and DevNet. We appreciate everything that you've done for us. We've had the biggest hackathon that we've had to date, so thank you. And of course, there's the great knock. So volunteers there, we've got line speed, and thank you, Rick Alfred, for you and your team, and Mideko, who brings in remote participants for the meeting. A reminder that Thursday is tomorrow. We've got Dave Conrad for Thursday Tech Talk. And hopefully everyone will have a chance, or most of you will have a chance to stop by and for that. And last but not least, certainly, we would like to announce our global host for Montreal IETF 105, July 20th through 26th, 2019. And thank you very much, Comcast NBC Universal. Thank you.
So the problem is that I can't dance. And I only sing old standards. Before I that's right. Before I begin talking about the IOC more generally, I first want to start with some infinite thanks to two people who are leaving the IOC. Leslie and Tobias are both previous chairs of the IOC. You may not know this, but not everybody in this room is always entirely nice to the IOC. And these are the people who took many of those slings and arrows over time. And I understand something about how you can, sometimes you misjudge things. Sometimes the community is not perfectly clear about all of the things that it wants. And I think that both Leslie and Tobias did some wonderful work. They helped us over time. So I really want to thank them very much. I know we're going to thank people later, but anyway. I want to do that mostly because sometimes I was the sling holder. So Glenn and I are joining the IOC again. I, for my sins, am coming back, and so my colleagues picked me as the fool who put his head in the sling. So here I am. We have some other welcomes to make. We have a new legal counsel. And this has been split up a little bit. So Brad is actually here and will be coming up a little bit later so you can see him in the flesh, but there is a picture. David Wilson is alas not here, but he is also part of our new council team, so that's great news. We also have a new sponsorship fundraiser. Ken is also here, and keep your eyes peeled for him and get your wallets ready. Now, we put up the detailed report already, so I'm not going to go into all kinds of details here, but it's there on the slides, and of course, you can find it on the web. But I do want to remind people of a couple of things. First of all, we have this new venue selection committee. So the meetings committee is coming to an end, and the new venue selection committee has been announced. The IOC appointed Glenn Dean, who is a member of the IOC, to chair the new venue selection committee. We're still looking for community volunteers for all of the committees, but I want to take this moment to thank Ole and Avri for their leadership of the meetings committee in the past. Now, why am I standing up here? Well, because of budgets. That's the reason we have the IOC. We're the people who are nominally responsible to you in order, having to do with anything to do with the money here. And the news is not as good as we would like. So we've put up the expenses and the annual, the budget and also the budget narrative. That was announced a little while ago and it's on the list. I urge you to read it. This is how we are accountable to you. You know, we do accounting. So this is something that I really urge you to have a look at because after all, you paid to be here, or most of you did anyway. And so the budget is not going down, it's the same. But what's really happening is our expenses are static and our revenue is not, it's falling. In particular, we got a problem with meetings. So we're having a hard time predicting what the attendance is going to be, and we don't know why. It would be great if we knew why, then we would have a model and it'd be fine, but actually our model's broken. Our sponsorship, however, appears to be stable. There are challenges there, as there always have been. That's the reason, of course, that Ken has joined us. You know, that part seems to be pretty good, but I'm quite worried about the attendance. So we're going to have to do some things about this. Now, what's been happening in the past is every time we run into a shortfall, ISOC says, well, don't worry about it, we're going to look after that. But that can't go on forever, right? So this year what we're going to do is we're going to take last year's actual contribution and we just increase the budget by that much, the budgeted ISOC contribution, which means that we better come inside our targets, right? So that's one thing. We're planning to keep the meeting registration fees the same in 2018. There's no current plan to raise them this year, but I want to draw your attention to that third bullet. The current forecast is that we're going to raise the meeting fees next year. And the guidance that's currently in the system is that we're going to do it a little more than 10% and then 3%, you know, in the following years. Now, we have not voted on this, so we have not, in fact, decided this. But it's early in the year, and we want to warn you now that this is coming so that you can start budgeting in your own budgets for it, so that when it happens next year, it's not a giant surprise. So be aware of this is potentially coming up. We will be debating this. We'll be discussing it in the IOC. We have a retreat in April, and there will be, you know, blood on the ground and everything by the time we leave because of the discussions over raising rates. Nobody likes to raise rates, but it's a fact of life. At the same time, we know that IASA 2.0 is coming along. We don't know how that's going to affect IETF finances. There's lots of things that could happen there, and nobody knows what's going to happen. That could affect registration fees as well, so you need to be prepared for that. There is the budget and finance page. I urge you once again to have a look at that budget because that's how we're held accountable to you. So a quick snapshot of the numbers so far. We've got paid attendance of about 1,200, which is just 40 fewer than projected, so this meeting is looking better than the last couple. We have 418 remote participants registered, however, and that is changing, you know, fairly rapidly, which has some implications for our budget as well, because we have to support all of that. There were 213 letters issued. Visa letters. So we've got some registration revenues and sponsorship revenues there. I don't think any of this is final. Usually this, there's some, you know, final adjustment that happens, but these are pretty close. So, you know, these are the numbers right now. So thanks very much for this. There are some additional materials at the end of this slide deck that you can download online if you want, but I'll stop talking so that we can get on to the interesting things in this meeting. Thanks very much.
So next we have the IRTF update. So Allison, if you could come on up.
Hello. I think people know who I am, and I want people to know more about what the IRTF is as well, but I'm Allison Menken. This is, you've seen this mission statement before in others of these plenaries, but we have a parallel organization of research groups that do work that's forward out ahead of what is reasonable to standardize. And the goal is to strongly have a close tie between them to make this a great place for new and innovative thinkers to bring work that can then become applied. I've added a no standardization sentence here because we continue to have confusion about whether, if we're producing RFCs, they'll also be standards. So the documents from IRTF, even if they are RFCs, and they aren't always going to be, will be experimental or informational, and are clearly labeled as such. And we're working on that within the context of the stream owners with Heather on that. This is a list of all the research groups, and I just want to mention that they are continuing to meet avidly here, and so I think there seems to be a lot of bringing together of people who are researchers with people who have been more traditionally not researchers. And we have a method of something called proposed research groups, where you can meet quite freely if you have a good idea for 3 meetings, and then we'll decide if it's actually progressing and is going to be useful. So we have 2 of those at the moment, path-aware networking and the decentralized internet infrastructure group that are moving along in that process. And in fact, path-aware had its 3rd meeting yesterday, and the room was strongly in support of it moving forward, and I think that will happen. Another bit of news tonight, the technical plenary is partly brought to you by the IRTF because it's co-organized by the IAB's committee and by the Gaia Global Access to the Internet for All research group. We encourage the groups to meet not only at IETF, but also to meet where the researchers are and to import people from the protocol community to the more abstract or theoretical groups. And MRG has been doing this for years, so they're the only one that's actually not meeting here because they'll be meeting at a conference in Taipei. And then we've started initial discussion because of some wonderful advocates for it, for a quantum internet research group. And the room there, we didn't actually take a hum. I don't know what a quantum hum would be like, but we did actually ask about, we got some comments about the fact that this might actually be timely now. There's a lot of likelihood that protocols will be developed to manage this really cool low layer that can do quantum entanglement, and those protocols could be developed by not us if we don't take action. So keep your eye on that. Join this mailing list, which is currently called QIRG, Q-I-R-G, and see, it's very interesting. And also, eventually, I've made this joke so many times, probably people have already heard it from me somewhere, but you'll eventually have to call yourselves the classic IETF, and we'll also have the quantum IETF, classical IETF. I've also want to mention that we have a yearly workshop which intends to slightly formalize how we do research being brought together with protocols. And the submission date is April 20th, so it's still in time for you to do your submission. You can either submit a paper that was published in the last year or a short new paper that would be sort of like a lightning talk. And it will take place in Montreal at the next meeting. What we will do, and this is another experiment, is have the meeting during the IETF week. So it'll be on the Monday rather than co-located, but not during the time. This is intended to help people to attend the workshop. I need to have a conversation with Beyonce about the way that, and team about the way that we're going to handle the registration fees. But the goal is, again, to bring the people together, and we'd like for people to stay and go to RGs and working groups now that so people who've never come. We have quite a few people who are new attendees who are here because of the IRTF and then learned something about, many of the speakers were new attendees. I should probably start tracking that. And the other thing we'll do is we'll have topical blocks so no research groups will meet that day, but also we'll make it so that it'll be easier for the IETF areas to say, most of the routing things are there, so I'll try not to schedule routing things. And I'll have to hope that this doesn't blow the minds of our very wonderful secretariat as we try to work on this, but I've been active in the scheduling anyway. So there's another note on the relationships we have, and there should be a good song for this, but anyway, we have many times when I say, oh, I wish that people from such and such research group had been here because look at this great stuff that is being presented, which is from the measurement world or something like that. So I want to advertise that yesterday, for example, the MapRG had great new data and analysis about current research working group topics, IPv6, the HTTP2 push, quick, DNSSEC, you get the idea. So corner me or send me mail, send mail to the IRSG about what you think might be useful in ways that we can help with the interworking here. We have another feature, which is every year we pick 2 best papers at the Applied Networking Research Prize, ANRP, for each IETF and announce them just before the IETF. We had presentations today during the IRTF Open Group, and I'll mention them. These are sponsored by Comcast, NBC Universal, and Internet Society, and we're very grateful for that. The sponsorship has been increased this year, and we're looking forward to adding some ability to give more people chances to come back after they've done one of these presentations and continue their engagement. We had the biggest set of submissions ever this year, and as a result, we could have actually had 10 or 12 of these awards, but we don't really have enough time to have presentations. And finally, IRTF.org is where you can find all of our info, but if you also go to our Twitter feed, in Retafo, you can see the victorious picture of the 2 ANRP folks that I just posted today, and find out more. And I'm very happy to talk with people or answer questions during the open mics.
Okay, next we're going to hear from the past and current NomCom chairs. So Peter Yee and Scott Mansfield, if you guys could come on up.
Alrighty, this is the NomCom report. So for the NomCom 2017-2018, I'd like to draw your attention once again to our voting members list and for the list of non-voting members as well. Those are the liaisons, advisors, and chair positions. And this is the output of why there is a NomCom. We made selections for the IAB, IAOC, and IESG. As you can see there.
I don't see Beyonce, though.
Yeah, I didn't get the memo about Beyonce. As part of the NomCom's work, we also bring up some areas of weaknesses. These are things that we notice while we're going through the NomCom process, and this is not new. We brought up these issues last year as well. It still remains these still remain areas of concern. So some areas have very small leadership pools and perhaps even smaller pipelines of future leaders. The internet area, the transport area, we just find it difficult to get nominees there, and we would very much encourage anyone who's got the slightest interest in a leadership position to consider running. There's also the obvious concern about employer support. And so we are giving some consideration, Scott may address that, about an earlier call for nominees to give people more time to line up employer support, because it takes a while, we understand that, and sometimes if you don't get into the process early enough, it's hard to get feedback as well and really be engaged in the NomCom. So our requests of the community. Check your eligibility to volunteer for the NomCom. I think last year we had about 125 people. You can check online, and you can actually volunteer for the NomCom just by checking the yes box on the registration form. And I think it looks back a year, so I know that we surprised some people last year when we announced the selections for the NomCom, and some folks couldn't remember having actually volunteered. So we will work on that. Also, if you're interested in providing feedback on the nominees, you need a data tracker profile, so make sure you have one of those. And then if you have any specific inputs that you'd like to make that are not necessarily about the actual nominees, but about the area and issues and things like that, do let us know.
Thank you.
Scott, you're up.
Thank you very much. So I'll just introduce myself real quick. I don't want to take a lot of time. I'm Scott Mansfield. I, of course, an individual representing the IETF community, but my employer is Ericsson. And so I just wanted to give you a chance to see who I was, and if you have questions about NomCom, please come and ask me. I would really like to start the process a little bit earlier this year so that we can get some more feedback and try to get a much bigger pool. I would also like to see more people volunteer to be selected to work on the NomCom, because it really is a great roller coaster ride. You'll have a great time, and we actually even feed you a little bit at the meeting. So that's about, does Spencer have a question? Or
Spencer Dawkins, third term area director for transport. And I was just going to suggest to the community that we also remember, thank you all for serving, and thank you, the NomComs, for serving up a pretty impressive group of leadership over a bunch of years, which I've had the opportunity to serve under and serve with. It seems to me that at least a little bit of what we're talking about here is kind of like the Kobayashi Maru thing, where it's like basically this is a fascinating problem to solve about how we recruit leadership for a couple of the areas, and that there may not be any way to solve that other than doing the James T. Kirk thing of saying we're going to reprogram the simulator. And that's not your problem to solve, okay? And that's not the ISG's problem to solve or the IAB's problem to solve particularly. That's really a community thing. So I would ask the people in the community be thinking about what we as a community can do to reprogram the simulator so that we're not sitting here in 2028 having the same conversation about the end area and the transport area. Because I'm almost sure there will still be an IP protocol and perhaps even quicker TCP.
yeah, thank you very much for that. I think that is excellent input, and what the NomCom can do is continue to bring that message back to the leadership and help foster the discussion, because like we always say with these NomComs, it's basically you get a big box, you put it in the middle of the room, you let the cats jump in it, and then you close the lid. So the last thing I'll say is I'd like to thank Kathy Brown for selecting me, and then Peter and Lucy, I'm going to rely on them heavily to hopefully that this NomCom for 2018-2019 will run as smoothly as the last two. Thank you very much.
So just a real quick thanks. I wanted to thank everybody who did volunteer for the NomCom 2017-2018. Look for Scott's email shortly asking for volunteers. So if you haven't volunteered previously on a registration form, you can do that by email as well. I'd like to thank all of those who were nominated and accepted their nominations. Obviously, as we've said, we need more of you. A special thank you to the Secretariat, who makes it so easy for us to have NomCom meetings, NomCom sessions here at the meetings. It really makes a difference. And then finally to the tools team for some quick hacks to the data tracker. We use the data tracker all the time. All of the data goes in there, and they made our lives a lot easier. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
I just want to second that appreciation for the NomCom, for Peter and everyone else who was on the NomCom last year. It's an arduous task, particularly in the November meeting and the fall and winter timeframe. And those who volunteer, I think, deserve special recognition from us for their willingness to commit the time and energy that it takes to help us find the next generation of leaders for the IETF. So big thanks to all of you and to Scott for being willing to shepherd it this year. So next we're going to hear about the Postel Award.
I'm Kathy Brown, and it is that time of year again that it's my great pleasure to introduce the Postel Award. To those who don't know, John Postel was in the center of the internet. You can see by the relationships, almost everything some of us, all of us are doing, he was there at the beginning. His memory is kept alive in this award. It's kept alive in all of you as well. But the year after his untimely death, the Internet Society established the Jonathan B. Postel Award to honor individuals or organizations that, like John Postel, have made outstanding contributions in service to the data communications community. The list of awardees is quite impressive at this point. There are some fabulous recognition here on this list of people. I know in the last 4 years that I've had the privilege to be involved, this community has nominated and then selected some incredible contributors. And I have noted that the delight, the delight of those who win is quite authentic, real, and they feel quite privileged to have received it. So I'm asking you to think about the nominations for this year. Here are the criteria for the award. For those who might ask, the Leadership Award Committee is actually the past recipients. They appreciate a good list, and that list mostly comes from you all. There is obviously a crystal trophy and a $1 award, but it is really the honor of receiving it. The nominations open today. They will close May the 2nd, and you can do your nominations at this website. Thank you.
So next we're going to hear a preview of IETF 102. If I could invite Chris Bowers to come on up.
I did, yeah.
You did, okay.
It should be up there, but we don't really,
Oh, there it is, I see.
it's just a picture of
It's an
Montreal.
amazing slide.
Yes. So on behalf of Juniper Networks, I'm happy to be able to invite you to IETF 102 in Montreal, Canada, coming up this July. And we're looking forward to another very productive meeting. Thanks.
Big props for brevity. Okay. So next we are going to recognize a few members of our community. Let's see if and so I'd like to ask Deborah Brungard to come on up. Oh, you're already here. Great.
Okay, while these two people are currently in the routing area and as chairs, their influence has extended way past the routing area, and I'm sure you all are very familiar with them. The first one is George Swallow. We want to thank him for all his contributions and best wishes for his retirement. He has been chair of the MPLS Working Group for more than 20 years. I think it's going on 21 plus now. He authored more than 40 RFCs. He authored the first RFC on RSVP traffic engineering, and also many have pointed to me that his LSP ping has also been one of the most famous of his accomplishments. And yes, as they say, yes, we still got it up. And he's mentored many IETFers throughout his time with us, including myself. So George, would you like to stand up? We'll give you a hand. Okay, and the next person is a very familiar face to you all also. It's Pat Thaler. She has been IETF's IEEE go-to person for everything. And she's been IEEE 802 participant since 1985. She has, I've heard, held the most leadership positions in IEEE of any person. So last week or the week before, they really honored her there, and we are honoring her here. Her first IETF attended, we estimate at IETF 50, and she most instrumentally helped us form our IETF IEEE 802 committee coordination group, which has really helped our relationships. And currently, she's the DetNet working group chair. Pat, stand up. Hey, thank you. So thank you to both of you.
Thank you. So next we're going to recognize our outgoing IESG members. We have 3 people rotating off this year. First, Aaliyah Atlas from the routing area. Aaliyah has been a persistent voice on the IESG, at least in my experience, keeping us honest as far as the way that we operate, the way that we try to shepherd work and steer the community in order to make sure that our process is open to as wide a variety of voices and interests and individuals as possible. And I think that has made a lasting impact on the IESG and the work that we do in the IETF. She's also really focused a lot on the leadership aspect, particularly in the routing area, thinking about training new leaders and how we can help people be successful in the IETF. And I think in addition to all of her many technical contributions, we owe her a debt of gratitude for those efforts, which for the rest of the community maybe weren't visible outside of the routing area or the IESG, but I think we're quite important. We have some gifts that we got for our IESG members here. Actually, there's 3 of them, and we had to kind of decide, do we want to get all of them ponies, or do we want to get all of them unicorns? We ended up getting 2 ponies and a unicorn, so Aaliyah, we have a pony for you up here. Come on up. It's actually a pony in a beer mug. One of the groups that Aaliyah has shepherded at length. There you go.
Thank you so much.
Oh, this is not the real plaque. This is the fake plaque. So next we have Benoit Claes, who's been one of the ops and management ADs. So on Sunday, I think it was the Sunday IESG meeting this week, Benoit put his hand up to speak on some topic. I don't even remember the exact agenda item that we had in the IESG's own Sunday morning meeting. And on Jabber, one of the other area directors immediately wrote to me and said, what do you want to bet he mentions Yang? And the crazy thing is, he didn't. It was crazy. It was like 30 seconds of speaking, and he did not mention Yang. In addition to his many efforts to push Yang throughout the industry and in the IETF, Benoit has been relentless in holding us accountable to being relevant to the industry, to adopting operator feedback and input into the IETF, and to trying to make the IETF a place where that sort of input is welcome and incorporated, and that the on-the-ground experience that operators have is reflected in the standards that we create. And I think, again, that will have a lasting impact, not just in the ops area, but throughout the IETF and certainly in the ISG. So, Benoit, your pony comes in a Yang mug, so if you could come on up, we'll give that to you. Actually, it says Forever Yang, so.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Kathleen Moriarty, who will be rotating off as well from the security area. Kathleen has been a stalwart colleague of mine, personally, I would say. We joined around the same time. Has really brought a view from the operational security community into the IETF itself and onto the ISG that I think didn't really exist in its current form before. And that has, I think, enlightened all of us into many of the aspects that were not often considered in protocol development in the IETF as recently as 4 or 5 years ago. And so I think I hope she will continue to provide that perspective in her future endeavors and as an individual participant, and that we will continue to carry that work forward as we transition to the new IESG. Now, Kathleen, since we had to go with either ponies or unicorns, we got you a unicorn because security area, but it's actually a pretty special unicorn, because it's musical when you squeeze it. So yeah, Alexa just showed this to me. So let's see. So if you can find a way to use this as an individual participant going forward, like bring it up to the microphone with you. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could be done with a musical unicorn, let's be honest. So come on up. Additionally, we couldn't figure out what to put in your mug, so we didn't get you a mug, but we did get you the required security hoodie.
So it falls to me to notify the community when 2 members of the IAB have escaped. And this particular year, the escapees are Lee Howard and Joe Hildebrand. I think these guys like each other, so if they would come up together, I'll embarrass them at the same time. First, I want to call out Lee's service to the IAB because he did something that's really important. He was a champion for a particular evolution of the internet becoming the default. So we have seen Lee, in almost any context, challenge us to make sure that whatever we were thinking about, whatever we were building, not only worked on IPv6, that it was IPv6 native in every possible way. And so as a champion of IPv6, he's really helped the whole IAB not just focus their attention on that particular issue, but make sure that that context is the base part of how we think about the network going forward. And I really want to thank him for that service. And for each of them, we've developed an architecture tester so that they can go out into the world and continue to serve the internet. This particular one, which is dev device 0002, make sure that the network it's connected to is IPv6 capable, has no NATs on it, and traverses with absolutely no interference. So please take it with you and make sure that you use it well. Joe's service to the IAB started at the same time as mine, and I'm desperately sorry to lose him as a colleague because he helped me birth so many bad ideas. And I even helped him birth one or two. The one thing I really want us to focus on from Joe's service, in addition to his tremendous knowledge of both modern development practices and how middle boxes work and how the web works, is his insistence that we think about explicitness in the network. When we think about how people derive signal from the network, we think a great deal about how people watch the network as it passes. And although Brian and many others of the community think about measurement very deeply, Joe was really insistent that we think very hard about what it would take to make explicit signaling a core part of the network architecture. That work is still going on. But we think Joe can take it forward in Mozilla and his other roles. And we've built for you this network tester, which looks very explicitly to see if there's adequate TLS, whether the domain name system is working as it ought to, and whether the rest of the things that go into making the web substrate work exactly as they're meant to. That's fantastic. If you'd like to play along at home, this is, of course, an open source project. It's we'd like to thank Jari Arko for leading it. It's at his GitHub repo, so github.com/jariarko/archtester. It's fully open source. You can add your own tests and change it any way you like. Thank you to both of you for your service to the IAB. Would you like to stand and hold a... There's more than one of these plaques. Oh, thanks. So just for... Oh, that's right. I'm going to get to pretend you work for Google for a moment. Just hold them up. Thanks to both of you. So it's great that the ISOC plaques are themselves an open source project, because we'll be adjusting this in the back as we go. Our next appreciation is for Neville Brownlee. Neville, would you come up, please? I don't see Neville. So let me tell you a brief story before we appreciate him in his absence, and that is Neville actually served a year longer than he asked to serve. He actually tried to retire last year, and Robert Sparks and the rest of the IAB basically threw our collective arms around his knees and said, "We're not ready yet, please wait." And he was kind enough to give us an extra year of his time and attention, and this year he spent a great deal of time with our incoming ISE, Adrian Farrell, to bring him up to speed and to make sure that the RFC editor function had no blip because of any lack of information being transmitted. And so, although he has probably escaped for a very well-earned pint somewhere, I'd like you to join me in expressing your appreciation. We'll catch him sometime later in the week for the obligatory picture with the plaque. Thanks.
Mosey on over, Ted. So that brings us to the technical plenary. So Brian, I'll leave it to you, and I'm going to go sit down.
Hi, good evening. I'm about to say something that's going to surprise some people in the room. The internet is a network of networks. Not as good as the Beyonce joke, I know, I'm sorry. So the variety and the diversity of networks that people use to connect to the internet is increasing. So part of this is due to innovation in access technologies. Part of it's due to the fact that there are just more internet users in the world, and the diversity of sort of the ways that they can connect to the internet, the physical infrastructure is expanding. And we thought it would be interesting to have a discussion about the future of access networks given this diversity. So I'm going to escape very quickly. I'd like to call Jane Coffin, the co-chair of the Gaia Research Group and Director of Development for the Internet Society, Director of Development Strategy for the Internet Society, to come up and introduce our plenary speakers, if you'd also come up.
Good evening, and thank you very much for staying. We have three fabulous speakers. I'm not going to speak very long, but what I am going to do is let you know who is up here with me. We have Leandro Navarro, who's a professor at UPC in Barcelona, but he also works with Guifi.net, which is a community network in Spain. We have Steve Song, who, if you haven't seen his manypossibilities.net website, take a look. Don't crash it right now. But he has great mapping, and is one of a fabulous host of humans that I work with on community networks. John Brewer knows a lot about community networks and a lot about what's up in the sky with satellites. So if you give us 1 sec, we'll get started. I just lost my phone and got it back, so I'm very excited. So how do these people all weave together in this network of networks? So one, on community networks, I have the privilege to work with people every day who are building networks from the bottom up, ground up, community up. We call it for the community, with the community, by the community. It's partnering at the local level to provide connectivity where there isn't connectivity. As many of you know, there's obviously this digital divide around the world, and we see the gaps where people aren't going to provide that connectivity, whether it's wireless, wireline, Wi-Fi, or other. These networks, Leandro will tell you more about them, but they're sparking innovation at the local level. And we're stealthily using major meetings like the IGF. I know that can be a point of contention for some, but we support the IGF for many reasons, but we're using it to bring community networks together so they can meet each other, know each other, and do more work at the technical level. On the mapping of infrastructure side and resources, the spectrum cocktail, Steve will talk about that. And you'll see some of the stories with respect to infrastructure gaps from his maps. Then we'll move over to John to talk about the future in the sky. Many of you also know that with respect to spectrum and satellites, you need orbital slots, something very important. We don't do that here. The ITU helps out with that, but that's part of hanging the birds in the sky. So that's a network architecture that meets Spectrum Plus with technical innovation, and the question is that really going to be the future of connectivity? So I think satellites are almost as cool as submarine cables, but that will be up for you to decide. Each of our speakers has 12 minutes, then we'll take Q&A. So Leandro, you're up first. We couldn't have done any of this without Cindy, so thank you.
Hi. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about the local part of connectivity. So this is about community networks, or in other words, this is about everyone, but not everyone in the room, but everyone in the world. And that is not initially technical. It's about rights, human rights. So if you look at Article 19, well before the internet appeared, it says that we have the right to seek, receive, and exchange information and ideas through any media. And now we are talking about the internet. So we all know not everyone has access to the internet, but even worse, not even everyone can provide it. So this is quite diverse. If we look at this map about the world's population, you see it's quite diverse in density. If we focus on the part we are, like London and that column, we see that Europe is well populated, as it is most part of Africa. But when we move to, let's say, the IP space, Europe is there. It's a hot area. Even the northern part, which is not that populated, it's also well connected. But you don't see Africa there. Why? Well, we know. And it has to do also with any other type of infrastructure. So when you look at electricity or lighting, you see that Europe is bright, whereas Africa is not. So we know there are many obstacles, but we are aiming, or I think many of us are aiming to what people call it the universal service. So it's the right of having functional internet connection that is affordable. Affordable means different things for different locations. And in the end is to participate in society. We know how to do it in urban areas, in rich areas. It's very easy because people is close to each other, so infrastructure is easy to deploy. And how about rural areas? I mean, places where people is spread out, and maybe they have less money to spend. So the solution to have sustainable infrastructure, sustainable services, it's a combination of business models, diversity in business models, and technology, diversity in technology. So just looking quickly about what is the distribution of offline population, that there is a kind of market, a big market in Africa by more than about 1 billion people. If you look at Asia Pacific, 2.4 billion. So I think it deserves a lot of attention. Also, when you look at the gaps, there is, in addition to the geography, there is a gap of gender, there is a gap of income, there is a gap of non-being in urban areas, there is a gap of age, there is a gap of education. So there are many gaps. And well, I mean, it's a challenge, really, to deliver in such a diverse environment. Again, we know how to do it for the world economy, for the rich countries. It kind of works in some local markets. Definitely is very difficult in what they call it subsistence economy, where there's little money, little formal structures, and basically survival. So how do we offer? How do we provide affordability? Well, there is one model we know is we bring the connectivity to them, and then, well, they pay if they can. Or the other way is like we try to help develop those infrastructures locally and bootstrap an economy in a way. So within farms, fields, and less profitable places, they found out some time ago that that is possible to do that, not at market prices, but maybe at local provision. And people learn, and there are many examples, people learn how to do it, and they created their own infrastructures. So that's what we call community networks. I mean, networks which are, we call it crowdsourced, which are built by citizens and by contribution and interconnection. Sounds like the internet. And then So we end up having a shared networking infrastructure, and that infrastructure is built on anything that works, that is cheap enough, that it's interoperable enough with the different other components. So you will see community networks are not by far homogeneous. Anything is interconnected, and then governance is quite open. It's like, you will see some examples later, or one example. It's open to anyone. It's cooperative, sometimes because there is no other way than doing it at cost. There's no margin for profit, initially at least. Who invests? Anyone. Small investments together produce results. And of course, it's open to anyone. So openness, in many senses, is critical for the development of these local infrastructures. This is how, for instance, looks like one of these networks in a semi-rural area where you see a lot of connections, a lot of homes connected through Wi-Fi links. This is part of GIFINET, which in a way is a small internet in this region of the world. Many local networks, many groups, they connect with each other and then they share some internet connection. All these islands are not, in many cases, are not interconnected among themselves. They just belong to a community that have common governance principles. So they are not like a restaurant model, we call it. Like it's not that you have to go to a licensed place to get connectivity. Of course, that is the operator model, but it's more like a homemade, like home-cooked connectivity produced by volunteers that become sometimes operators, small operators, based mostly on Wi-Fi, nowadays also including fiber. And they learn how to organize and grow themselves, and they've created like an optical backbone. They share a number of internet connections. They are very successful in traffic and interconnection with the local exchange. And this is only like in about 12, 13 years. The governance of many of these community networks, there are hundreds around the world. They are typically based on the idea of a commons, of an infrastructure commons, similar to fisheries, community forests. I mean, it's an old model formalized by Elinor Ostrom on Nobel Prize of Economy. And of course, the objective of these initiatives is about sustainability, mainly, which is, they call it avoiding the tragedy of the commons. And ensure that everyone has an opportunity to expand the network and use the network. And everyone means not only citizens, but also professionals, small companies, private, public organizations that benefit from that infrastructure in that place. So you know, if we want to address the problem of these diverse needs of the unconnected, there must be multiple business models probably adapted to different local conditions. We know the large operators, we know the WISPs, we know, for instance, community networks, and then they differ in many aspects, which is good. So we can find the optimal solution. And also, we have to be careful because technologies usually come already with some business models. Think about GSM or 5G. They have the operator model behind. But also there are more decentralized technologies like Wi-Fi, mesh, Bitcoin, all that stuff, which allow these kind of initiatives. And of course, all these models are supported by the idea of infrastructure sharing, which makes things more complicated but less costly. And open access networks are useful, internet exchanges are useful. Even some community networks become that along the growth. So related to our IETF community, community networks are places for experimentation, basically. So you find anything. I mean, GIFINET has a lot of autonomous systems. They use BGP, they use OSPF, any kind of routing protocol you can imagine, someone try it. It's an IP network, so anything works. There are a lot of expansions towards creating a regional internet exchange, about experimenting with network virtualization, anything. And also in the economic model, because it's based not on a centralized authority, but on a compensation system. We call it, like, we compensate consumption and contribution, incentives, and now they are exploring for years the idea of blockchain, crypto coins, as a way to decentralize that. So my final point is that, yeah, there is a need for an open internet. Without an open internet, these networks would not be possible. Without the idea of self-provision, it wouldn't be possible. We have to make sure that this is legal, allowed, easy, accessible to everyone. Cooperation is the basis to construct these infrastructures that no single one can build. A lot of lessons learned from community networks, not just in bringing in connectivity, but also bringing development, bringing business models, bringing income, bringing jobs, bringing local resilience to the digital infrastructure of many communities. We need standards, we need interoperability, we need commodity components, we need ways to incrementally upgrade the networks, we need to decentralize all the aspects. And my point is that I think that connectivity for the next 50% of the global population will come bottom up. And that's a hot topic of the Gaia working group, so you are welcome to come tomorrow to discuss the details. Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Steve Song. I work with the Network Startup Resource Center on increasing access to wireless spectrum. I'm also a senior fellow with the Mozilla Foundation, working on digital access and inclusion. I'd like to apologize in advance for the title of my slide, opening. I don't really know how to connect everyone, but I do have some ideas about how we could improve things. The guy you see on the right-hand side in that slide, his name's Peter Bloom. He runs a nonprofit organization in Oaxaca in Mexico, and they build out low-cost GSM base stations in remote areas where the larger operators don't go. And Peter was at the Mobile World Congress a couple of weeks ago, and the Mobile World Congress, in case you don't know, it's the kind of global shindig for mobile network operators. And he came back from it and he said to me, he said, Steve, you know, I get the feeling that people care more about connecting refrigerators to the internet than they do about connecting the poor. And I think this is actually true. I mean, if you look for a conference on the Internet of Things, I mean, you could probably go around the corner. I mean, you could go to one every week for the rest of the year and not run out. Whereas trying to find people to talk about connecting those who can't afford the internet or where the internet doesn't exist, that's a lot thinner on the ground. And that matters. And the reason it matters is because of this. I mean, the internet is a mutant superpower. I mean, is there anyone who doesn't feel like the internet is a mutant superpower? I mean, who hasn't been like just profoundly changed by the way the internet sort of enables you to learn, to manifest things in the world, to connect with people? It's incredible. And as we were discussing at lunch today, it's not always a good mutant superpower, but it is indeed a superpower you would not want to be without. And the problem then is that for those without access, they're moving backwards only by standing still as the internet becomes a more and more valuable resource. And so by not focusing on connecting the unconnected, we're creating an increasingly large digital divide. And this is not okay. At least it's not okay for me. And so most of my work is in sub-Saharan Africa. So I want to talk a little bit about the sort of technological development of access. And I'll start here. This was 2005, and The Economist had worked out that mobile phones were actually going to be the big thing in terms of access. And indeed, even in 2005, we had no idea just how important mobile phones were going to be in terms of connecting those without access. And that was before you could actually get the internet on mobile phones. And there was a general perception, and I think it persists now, that basically the problem's solved, right? Mobile phones are just going to sort of eventually connect everyone. But the reality isn't actually like that. Subscriber penetration is now tapering off, and the business models for the large operators simply don't make it into sparsely populated rural areas. We actually need something different. And before I talk about that, I want to talk about one other technology that doesn't get talked about as much as mobile networks or mobile telephones, but I think it's a technology that is having as big an impact in sub-Saharan Africa as mobile phones themselves, and that's fiber optic networks. So 10 years ago, there was effectively no fiber optic undersea cables reaching sub-Saharan Africa. Well, technically there was one, but it was controlled by a cartel and it was more expensive than satellites. So we'll just say no. But, and fast forward to 2018, and there were over a dozen high-capacity undersea cables reaching sub-Saharan African countries, with 6 more planned in the next couple of years. And for me, this is staggering. I would never have projected this level of investment. And of course, that investment sparked a tsunami of investment in terrestrial fiber infrastructure now, to the extent that primary and secondary cities across the continent have access to fiber optic infrastructure, which is amazing, because once you're on fiber, you're only milliseconds from the living, beating heart of the internet. But the challenge then becomes, how do we actually get from those fiber points of presence out to reach everyone? And that answer lies in wireless spectrum. And of course, we've all seen headlines like this, the spectrum crunch cometh. The access to spectrum has become a real issue. It's partly a real issue simply because of the pace of technological change. That regulation simply isn't keeping up with technological change. And I'll give an example of this. This was a decision taken in 2006 among African countries to make a transition from analog terrestrial broadcasting to digital terrestrial broadcasting. And it was projected it would take about 10 or 11 years, which is pretty speedy by regulatory standards for the refarming of spectrum. And mostly, it hasn't quite kept up with that. It's not done yet. But what is interesting is what 2006 did not know about the future. It didn't know about the smartphone, which was going to be introduced in the next year. Actually, it did know about Netflix, but the prime means of delivery of Netflix in 2006 was the US Postal Service. And it didn't know about tablets and the confluence of those things, streaming media on tablets. So while this decision was chugging along, technologies just blew right past it in terms of the delivery of media, and this is going to happen more and more. We need regulations that can cope with the pace of technological change. And we need access to spectrum, and so as demand has exceeded the administrative availability of spectrum, we needed a model for making spectrum available, and the dominant model is now the spectrum auction, which the economists tell us is the fairest way of making spectrum available, because those who value it are willing to pay the most for it. But it becomes problematic, especially in poor countries. Now, these are some spectrum auctions in the last 4 or 5 years across a number of African countries, and what you can see there is the price paid for spectrum is between $25 and $100 million. But that's the successful bidders for that spectrum were a maximum of 1. And that's typically the largest mobile network operator or the incumbent who got access to that spectrum, or in fact, sometimes it's none because the actual price floor of the spectrum is so high. And what happens when the price floor is that high, you don't get the competition that you wanted from the auction in terms of multiple winners. But also recent research suggests that very high fees paid at auction for spectrum leads to lower quality networks, to reduced build-out, and worst of all, to higher prices for consumers. But this is the future we are promised. This is right now in the UK, there's an auction going on for 5G spectrum, and that mobile networks will solve all these problems by rolling out everywhere. But in fact, this is not going to lead to increased rollout into poor, sparsely populated rural areas, because this model doesn't incentivize anyone to do that. And then there's another piece of spectrum, a tiny unloved corner of the spectrum band, the ISM bands, and Wi-Fi, which, I mean, I think we all know and love. But the meteoric rise of Wi-Fi technology in terms of its pervasiveness and embeddedness in everything is absolutely phenomenal and doesn't get sufficient recognition by regulators in terms of its impact. And it's not just Wi-Fi in Heathrow Airport in this hotel. Across the African continent, there has been in the last 2 to 3 years a spectacular rollout of Wi-Fi enabled networks. And those models are, some are community-led models, some are government-led models, some are commercial models, but it happens because the technology is cheap and powerful and because you don't require a license. The barrier to actually rolling it out is very, very low. So you have, and the way I sort of think about it is, if you've seen the movie Aladdin, and the genie describing himself, phenomenal powers, itty bitty living space, and that's that tiny amount of spectrum that is available for Wi-Fi. It is quite small compared to the rest of the available spectrum. One of the things we could do is simply expand those ISM bands a little, especially in 5 gigahertz. Just by expanding those ISM bands, we can increase the amount of innovation that goes on by community networks like GIFINet. But it doesn't stop there, because there's a host of new companies out there building incredibly inexpensive power technology, inexpensive low power and low cost technologies. And those might be in dynamic spectrum like TV white space technologies. They might be in a new generation of LTE base stations. But what's the point of having a $3,000 LTE base station if you've paid $25 million for your spectrum, right? It throws the entire sort of, affordable access business model off. So we need new models. I mean, our current regulatory frameworks for spectrum are a bit like a 19th century hotel, where Baron Sternberg has his room reserved, whether he's traveling or not, and many of the rooms are empty, and it's just not an efficient way of making things happen. And one thing we know about software is it's very good at resource management. So a more Airbnb-style approach to the allocation of spectrum might serve us better. And not just for spectrum that's been unassigned, but even spectrum that's been assigned to operators where they aren't using it. Perhaps they can get a rebate on their universal service obligations by allowing other people to use that spectrum. So the way I think of it, and I'm trying out a new metaphor, so bear with me, is like a jar filled with these large rocks, and that's our current regulatory regime. It's just we have a jar, we have large rocks and we have the jar, but the jar looks full, but it's not. It's actually less than 50% of the volume of the jar. And what we need are smaller. We need regulation for smaller operators, whether they're community, nonprofit, for-profit, or municipal, to be able to fill in those gaps, whether they're regional, geographic gaps or niche sectoral gaps. We need a new framework that has, as this jar has, little smaller rocks. But the last point I want to make here is that as we do that, it turns out that not only do we need regulation for smaller operators, we really need more diversity in the access networks themselves. Because when you get identical business models and identical investment frameworks, as we see across mobile network operators, it's very hard for there to be real competition. What you ultimately get is a kind of race to the bottom in technology, or in terms of service. But when we have a diversity of access technologies, whether it's unlicensed spectrum, dynamic spectrum, light licensing, and licensed approach, and other technologies like fiber optic, then it's very difficult for the competition to become like for like, and you get more innovation in service provision. And that leads me actually to our next speaker, talking about a really exciting area of access diversity, the emerging changes in the satellite market. So with that, I thank you very much for your time.
All right, thanks, Steve. John Brewer, as you can hear from my accent, I'm from New Zealand. My talk is premised that the future is up in the sky. We're going to be talking about satellite. And to talk about the future, we need to understand a bit of language. So first, we're going to start to talk about why we need satellite. Then I'm going to introduce you to the three main orbits and their latencies of the satellite networks. We're going to talk a lot about radio spectrum. We're going to talk briefly about satellite architectures, and I'm going to take you through three new commercial ventures. So first off, why we need satellite. This is pretty easy. This is a chart of the cost and relative cost and complexity of various technologies servicing broadband access with population density along the x-axis. Once you get to 10 or fewer people per square kilometer, satellite is less costly and less complex than any other access method. I've adapted this chart from a Communications Research Canada chart they submitted to the 802.22 working group about 15 years ago. It's an amazing chart, though, and it holds true today. So we're going to get into the orbits and latency. Here I've got a scale drawing here of the Earth with the three main orbits we'll talk about: low Earth orbit, LEO; medium Earth orbit, MEO; and GEO, geosynchronous orbit. We've got LEO down there at about 1,000 kilometers above the Earth, give or take a few hundred. We've got MEO at 10,000 Ks, give or take a few thousand. And we've got GEO sitting at about 36,000 kilometers above our heads. I've got latencies down there, and these latencies are actually 4 one-way trips put together, because when you're sitting at a computer on a satellite terminal, sending a request up to the satellite, it's going down to an Earth station, it's going out to the internet, fetching your data, coming back to the Earth station, going up to the satellite, down to your terminal. So these are the latencies before you hit the internet. Best case in LEO is going to be about 12 milliseconds. That's imperceptible. MEO, 120 milliseconds, still pretty much imperceptible. And GEO at 480 milliseconds, yeah, that's going to be perceptible. And so I've got this little curve, this funny bunch of dots there in the middle, and that's actually about 40 million samples of human reaction time, where people have sat in front of a computer and they've looked at an image flash up and they've clicked on it. Basically, this shows that about half of all people are going to perceive something as being slow if it's slower than 270 milliseconds. So very, very, very few people are going to notice a latency of 120 milliseconds. Everybody is going to notice a latency of 480 milliseconds. That's before you get your web page. So the perception of satellite to date has been, oh God, it's slow. And yeah, that's going to keep going for a bit with some technologies. Now, introduce you to the spectrum here. Three terms I want you to know in spectrum are C-band, KU-band, and KA-band. I've got a little note down at the bottom about L-band and V-band, which are also satellite technologies, but they're not really used for broadband access. Steve was talking about the small amount of Wi-Fi spectrum. Yeah, I've got that in blue down there at the bottom, and then I've also got the 2G, 3G, 4G bands in orange. Still a very tiny amount of radio spectrum. C-band is the smallest of the broadband satellite bands, and it's got a couple of holes in it because of Wi-Fi, but there's still a bit of spectrum there. C-band, KU-band starts at about 12 gigahertz, goes up to about 18 gigahertz, and there's a bit of interference from microwave linking and other technologies there, but at least in New Zealand, we're starting to shift shift some microwave services out of that band and freeing it up for satellite. Ka band starts at about 26 gigahertz and goes up to 40, and there's not a lot going on there. A little bit of microwave linking, a little bit of LMDS, which never went anywhere, so it's pretty clean, pretty empty. Huge amounts of spectrum in Ka, quite a bit in Ku, not very much in C-band. Quick primer on satellite spectrum. We've got 4 things that we think about for spectrum. We think about availability, reuse, antenna sizes, and rain fade. And, well, C-band, very little spectrum, Ka-band, quite a lot. Reuse, which we'll talk about in the next slide. We've got very low reuse in C-band, very high reuse in Ka-band. Antenna size, pretty obvious, huge antennas for C-band, tiny antennas for Ka-band. And then rain fade, very little rain fade in C, quite a bit in Ka-band. I'll quantify that in a few slides. First off, we've got reusability. So reusability is a function of the frequency, the size of the waves, little waves spread less, and also the distance away from Earth. So your low Earth orbit satellites are going to have better reusability of spectrum than your GEO satellites, just because the spot beam has less time to spread. With C-band spectrum, imagining we're at a geostationary satellite orbit now, 36,000 Ks up, you may get a C-band channel covering about half of Australia. I made this slide for the OSNOG meeting, so it's Australia. At Ku band, you're going to get about 4 spots of the same channel. You're going to get to reuse the same channel about 4 times in the same area as you would a single C-band channel. And Ka band is 16 to 20 times. So you get an amazing amount of reuse from Ka band. Now, about those antenna things, well, an antenna basically focuses radio energy. It doesn't make more energy, but to focus 1 watt of radio energy in C-band, you'd need a 1.2 meter dish. In Ku band, to focus the same amount of energy, you'd only need a 600 mil dish, and in Ka band, 300 mil dish. We're talking A4 sheet of paper compared to 1.2 meter giant thing that acts as a sail in the wind. So really, Ka band, huge amounts of spectrum, very small antennas, huge amounts of reusability. It's like a panacea until you get to the rain. And I could really just leave this slide up here and you just believe me, but I made a chart that you can download and look at offline because it's a bit dense. But here in the right-hand side y-axis, we've got drizzle, light rain, medium rain, heavy rain, tropical downpours. And on the left-hand y-axis, we've got attenuation in decibels per kilometer. When you're going from a satellite terminal on the ground to a satellite and you're going straight up, you're going through a couple of Ks of rain. If you're going at an angle, you may be going through a couple of more Ks of rain. Having attenuation of a few decibels per kilometer, you quickly lose your link budget and you run out of signal. In a medium rainstorm, C-band doesn't notice, Ku band doesn't notice, Ka band starts to go away. In a heavy rain, C-band doesn't notice, Ku band starts to flicker, you might get a bit of packet loss, Ka band just goes away. It really just goes away. And in tropical downpours, which happen every afternoon for a couple of minutes in most tropical places, your Ka band service is just gone, even with a several meter dish. So I've got a straw man here for temperate climate, say I've got a 1.2 meter dish on my roof. I like 1.2 meter dishes, they're nice and big. So we might, out of a Ka service, get 512 megabits per second off of one of these new satellite services, but only 99.7% reliability. There's a satellite company in the Pacific actually selling 99.7% reliability and talking it up as a big deal. And really the people buying it don't have any idea that that means they're going to drop out like every single day. And they're just going to hate it because they're going to lose a few seconds here and there all the time. Ku band, same size dish, 64 megs, 99.9% reliability. Your C-band service, you may get 4.5 or even 5 nines, but you only get 16 megabits per second because you've got less spectrum to work with. Anyway, a couple of architectures to think about because this is sort of a place where people think about architecture and this is going to matter. We've got our basic old school VSAT up and down, and some people take 2 VSATs. That's a very good idea, especially if they're pointed in different directions. You go through different weather in different directions. You may start to have multimodal configurations where you've got a geostationary primary service and a low Earth or medium Earth backup service, or the other way around. You may have a multimodal service, which does exist, where you have a primary fiber connection and a backup satellite, or the other way around. A couple of providers in American Samoa actually use a satellite as their primary and fiber as their backup, because the fiber capacity from American Samoa to Hawaii has been full for years. Couple of advanced architectures here. We're starting to get networks where you're doing satellite crosslinks. So your signal goes up to one satellite, goes over to another, goes down to an Earth station that's well beyond the horizon. And cloud avoidance for your KA service, where you may have very high rain fade. There are places like Rarotonga where they've installed 2 terminals on opposite sides of the island, connected by fiber, measuring the signal levels from the satellite at all times, handing off automatically between the dishes to pick up the one that has the better signal to avoid the rain, because rainstorms do just move in small cells across the cities. When I operated a microwave network in Auckland, I could watch my 23 gig links fade, and I could tell you exactly where the storm was going across the city, because Nagios would pop up alert, 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 and then they'd go back, and yeah, that's how rain fade works. So considering the architecture, you're going to have companies starting to offer blended satellite services where they're going to give you connectivity over multiple modes of satellite. You're going to have different capacities on these connections. You're going to have different levels of availability. You're going to have different latencies. You may actually have rapid latency changes with some of your services. How do you make this work? Heck, there were a couple of research groups I sat in on yesterday where they're thinking about these problems and may come up with a solution. So lots to think about here. Now, 3 representative commercial ventures here. Number 1, we've got NBNco, that's Australia's national broadband network company, and the one thing that they've done right is they bought a couple of satellites a few years ago. Everything else they've done wrong. But a couple of years ago, sorry, the Australians in the crowd know what I'm talking about. A couple of years ago, they launched 2 Space Systems Loral satellites, 67.5 gigabits per second. Look at the engineers in this picture and look at the size of those dishes up there. This is unfolded and the dishes are beaming down. Anyway, each of these satellites, 67.5 gigabits per second, 25 meg down, 5 meg up to end users. Balanced across 10 Earth stations. It is Ka band, so the people that live in the far tropical North Queensland, Darwin, they hate it because it rain fades. It's just awful for them. But everywhere else in the dry bits of Australia, they love it because it's really fast. It's kind of laggy. They know it's satellite, but it's much better than what it was. Expected lifespan until 2030. And NBNco does expect to increase the speed to end users to 50 megs down in the pretty near future. Now we've got another one. Look at this satellite here and look at the people next to it. Sort of compare those drawings. Yeah, okay. This one is a MEO satellite, and it's operated by O3B. The first real MEO broadband network ever, launched in 2014. They're a carrier, I want to say wholesale only, but they sell to oil rigs and cruise ships too. But they only sell one product, which is big, fast, fat access pipes. And you basically need to be buying a minimum of 600 megabit per second for them to care about you. They will take one of those satellites and they'll beam it down to you. These satellites whiz around the Earth. If you take an O3B service, you actually need to have 2 antennas. One of the antennas is in service and tracking a satellite as it whizzes across the sky, while the other is hunting for the next one to come over the horizon. They do the handover with BGP, which is just bizarre because it's a bit slow, but it does seem to work. Anyway, they've got 144 gigabits per second of capacity online. They've been so popular, they've ordered another 96 gigs of capacity. There is Ka band and there is rain fade even with people with 4-meter dishes, hence the whole multiple terminals and fiber between them and cloud avoidance. Don't try and run this in a tropical area with 2.4-meter satellites. You can ask Solomon Telecom about that if you want. Okay, last one, OneWeb. This doesn't exist yet, and really we don't have any low Earth orbit broadband networks yet, but gosh, we're about to have 3 of them, and there are a few other people who've put into the FCC for permission to launch these networks. OneWeb has gained a bunch of investment from companies like Virgin, companies like SoftBank. SoftBank put $1 billion in last year. Met somebody from SoftBank last week, and they said, yeah, it was a small investment. So anyway, they're looking at putting up these little satellites into low Earth orbit, 700 plus of them, and each one is going to have about 6 gigabits per second of capacity. So they're building a 4.2 terabit per second network to service rural and remote people. Nice. Intelsat plans to offer blended offerings combining this low Earth and their existing geostationary assets. Imperceptible latency, consumer focused, and it's KU band, so it is not going to have the fade problems of KA band. In fact, you should expect to run this off of an antenna that is maybe 600 mils. A company called Kymeta has made an antenna especially for OneWeb that is built into the roof of a car. So neat stuff going on. That is it. I only had 12 minutes. This is a 45-minute talk. There's a couple of versions online. There's one I did at APNIC in Taichung last year, one I did in New Zealand last year. Fortunately, the OSNOG talk was not recorded because I swore a lot in it. Anyway, there's a Q&A at the end of this, and of course you can come up and pepper us all with questions. Thanks for your time, guys.
Okay, so now we are going to take questions, question and answer for about 15 to 20 minutes. Q&A. Anybody? Yes. Oh, no, okay. Go easy on us.
Yeah, Dan Bogdanovic. 3 very interesting presentations. I really was interested to hear about the satellite and the speeds up because I started my career, among others, in the satellite communication, and having a 1.5 megabit connection was a big deal back in the early 90s. And that was a 3-meter antenna in order to get that. And the per minute was insane, but the cost per minute was insane. But what I'm really interested was the spectrum sharing. Spectrum is one of the most expensive and most underutilized resources that are out there, and many of them are lying dormant. And I was really, when you were mentioning many about the software-defined radio, but you didn't mention much about spectrum sharing and where you have some mechanisms in order that you can get the dynamically allocated spectrum and what is developing there. You mentioned a little bit T-Vision, but they are just, TV white space, yes. But I would be really curious to hear more because I know FCC was looking into that in order to make it more popular, but they haven't followed up lately.
Okay, thank you. So Steve, shared spectrum.
Yeah, actually, when I mentioned software, I didn't mean software-defined radio, although that is also very exciting. I meant software management of spectrum. So the 2 interesting areas, one is TV white space spectrum, which has particular application in sub-Saharan Africa because all of that spectrum is virtually unoccupied. So there's hundreds of megahertz of spectrum that could be used. And the other interesting space is the CBRS band in the US that is being promoted by Google. And both are basically the same idea, is using a geolocation database to dynamically assign spectrum based on an availability map that's calculated on the terrain and available frequencies. There's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be using these technologies. I mean, auctions are incredibly risky strategies for regulators, as I pointed out in my talk. They're not turning out well, especially in markets where there are limited resources, but they're too attractive in terms of a kind of financial windfall to get away from. But if you were thinking about spectrum regulation from a risk management point of view, that'd be a really dumb investment to like put all your eggs in one basket. And dynamic spectrum regulation is actually fantastic because it's a secondary use of the spectrum. So you're not committing yourself to the spectrum use. You're just allowing it to win if it wins. So the risk to the regulator is very, very low. And it's a bit like Wi-Fi, you know, that the opportunity to succeed is there. The problem is that it gets a lot of pushback because it is a potential game changer if it takes off. And so the mobile network operators actively discourage its use. The ITU, for reasons which I can only imagine is industry influence, actively discourage its use. So this technology, which has been available for years now, it lies unused, and there are manufacturers waiting for a regulatory signal to ramp up.
But in the US, FCC was really trying to push it through, and I don't know, like in 2014-15, they were trying to push, but was it, because that's also a political issue.
Thank you for that.
Policy.
And actually, I think we need to skip over to the next speaker over here. And thank you, Steve, for that. So to my left, to my right, your left.
Thank you very much. My name is Abdul Karim. I'm from Nigeria. And I'm glad that we are having this type of discussion in this room. Because when I look around, I look at people that look like me. I don't find a lot of us like this. And a lot of the issues that have been discussed this evening actually affects people from where I come from, Africa. So I'm glad that we're having this type of discussion. And I'm glad, especially with Steve, with what he has done and what you guys are doing. And looking at the examples of satellite communication, my problem is satellite generally is expensive. So I'm thinking, is satellite really one of the solutions we can look at? My question is, have you looked at something like high altitude platforms as an alternative to satellite? Thank you.
John? I think you said IoT, correct?
High altitude platforms, which is...
HAPS, sorry,
Yes,
high altitude platforms. Go for it.
In the longer version of my talk, I discuss a few high-altitude platforms, but so far there has not been a lot of success. I have watched the Loon project, which started in New Zealand a few years back, quite closely, and they really haven't achieved the speeds to end users or the economics required to make it a viable platform. Facebook's Kilo was great for a while until it landed. And Google had another high-altitude venture that they purchased, and that also looked great, and they shut it down last January and moved the engineers somewhere else. So I haven't seen a lot of success with high-altitude platforms. I really think the satellite is probably more realistic at this point.
And I think for many in the room would know this, but 98 to 2002, there was already there was a space race then. Yeah, Teledesic, others who were doing the HAPS. Teledesic wasn't doing HAPS, but other platforms like that. So this is the second generation of a race. In the middle?
Hi, my name's Aaron Falk. I currently work for Akamai. I was part of that first space race. I worked on Spaceway, Astrolink, TSAT, which was an Air Force program. I followed Teledesic closely. And most of those systems were never put into service. And the decision was ultimately around a business model. And the problem was, for these Ka-band systems, especially with onboard processing, that they're very expensive, and they're very expensive to launch. And when you have enough users in one place that you can make money off of a satellite link, somebody will dig a trench and drag a fiber over to it. Or now they'll put in a base station, right? But that was the problem then. So clearly launch costs are dropping, but I'm wondering, you know, do you believe that the economics of satellite communications have changed substantially enough to support a 700 satellite LEO system?
I think they have changed significantly because not only the competition in launch with SpaceX and Blue Origin coming up and
Virgin attempting to replicate what Orbital ATK have done with the airborne launch coming down the pipeline. But the cost of manufacturing satellites has just gone way down. And the speed at which you can manufacture a satellite has gone way down to the point where OneWeb are building 2 satellites a day. You think about how long it took Space Systems Loral to build the GEO satellites for NBNCo, like years. And here we are with LEO platforms building 2 a day. There was a bit of a scandal a few weeks ago. Somebody launched some microsats, some Seattle startup launched some microsats out of India. And I mean, these things are working, much to the dismay of the FCC and everybody else in the world. They built something in their workshop, they launched it into space illegally, and they're actually transmitting radio signals from it. So yes, the costs have gone down of everything. So I think we're not going to have quite the collision. I don't believe that all 5 of the LEO ventures are going to make it, but I'd say 3 of the 5 easy.
Interesting. Thank you.
And I think I'm getting signals from the floor. Yep. Over here.
Hi, Mark Nottingham. John, you mentioned very briefly satellite-to-satellite communication and building a mesh up in space. I was wondering if you could talk about the technology used for that and tell us a little bit more. And also, giving us a sense of, where are we going to be at, do you think, in 3-5 years? How many satellites, how pervasive is access by satellite going to be with these new LEO networks?
Okay, so really what Mark wants me to do is start talking about space lasers.
Yes!
We said we weren't going to do that, but...
Because in all honesty, we are going to see some optical cross-linking of these satellites, and there's actually a MEO platform that's well into being funded that is going to do optical Earth to space links to. There is going to be a lot of laser cross-linking, but funny enough, since my talk at OSNOG last year, there's been a huge race in V-band cross-linking, and a couple of new V-band constellations planned basically just to do cross-linking, because V-band is useless for going Earth to space unless you're in a desert. But up out there in the sky, there's nothing to attenuate your V-band, which is basically millimeter wave microwave. So they're going to build these V-band overlays. In terms of number of satellites, we've got like 1,500 or 1,600 operational communication satellites now, and I'd say within 5 years we'll be up an order of magnitude. It really will go that fast. Like, people have booked their SpaceX launches. Iridium, just put Iridium Next up. I think they've launched 60 satellites in the past year. So that's kind of the volume. We're looking at like 10 to 20 satellites per launch and a huge increase in launch, and it's all comm satellites. So we're going to have a lot.
Thanks.
Thank
and space lasers.
From lasers to across the room.
And my name is Ignacio Alvarez Amelín. I am Tech Fellow from the IETF. I would like to ask about the community networks, because perhaps was very short the time that give to you. But what about the certain proposal like Barcelona Libre, Buenos Aires Libre? It was a group of like hackers of Wi-Fi that try to provide this kind of access. But what about the names on this kind of? I mean, if you know how many are or more data about that.
So one thing I would say is that there is a forum called Battle Mesh, where they do a lot of hacking of mesh standards. And if you want more data, I can give it to you later about that. People do get together to hack some of the technology. But I would ask Leandro, there's an initiative among some of the community networks right now with something called Libre Mesh, Libre Router. Could you tell the group about that?
Yeah, I think the difference or the defining factor about community networks is not that they just not focus on getting the connectivity, but in finding other ways to do it and in develop software and explore options. So yeah, there are many initiatives. Particularly, there is one that is developing a new meta distribution for community networks. It's called LibreMesh. And that builds on a lot of contributions from many communities all over the world. But I mean, there's so many groups, so many forums. And as I said, the good thing is that on their way, they're experimenting with the technology. They are creating new technology, new ways, and sharing information in many forums. And that's like very promising because, I mean, for instance, many of the mesh routing protocols that are nowadays came up from experimentation. And yeah, the battle mesh is one of them, but there are many other groups around. So if you are interested, we can give you some pointers.
Thank you.
There's also a group called the Association for Progressive Communications. Steve works closely with them, and we just held 2 community workshops in Geneva 2 days ago. We were there for another meeting, but we are potentially in the Gaia group going to try and put together either an informational, and Greg Wood always keeps me straight on this, it's either an informational or an RFC that we could put together, it's not an RFC, but an informational document about community networks, which could include some of the data that APC is putting together. They're doing an analysis of about 60 different community networks around the world, so stay tuned. Pardon? So we're going to cut the lines. We did cut the lines. Brian's helping me here, so forgive me if I don't have it all down. I'm going to go to the set. Oh, hey, Paul Wilson.
Paul from APNIC. Yeah, I've got another question for John on the satellite track, but hopefully it's one that also is relevant to Steve. I'm kind of fascinated by these flat panel antennas on the ground side, and wondering if, by avoiding all the hardware and the tracking and all that stuff, whether they're a game changer in terms of the cost of delivering, receiving, and having a satellite station on the ground on account of the different hardware. Just wondering if that's a game changer that might sort of have some impact on the issues that Steve is raising. Thanks.
I have a feeling the flat panel antennas are going to be quite expensive to start, a lot more expensive than just a stamped aluminum dish. I will take this opportunity to thank Paul and APNIC because it was APNIC and the ISIF program who got me researching networks in the Pacific, which is what introduced me to all the carriers using these new Ka-band technologies like O3B, and really gave me a great perspective on their problems with weather and their problems with capacity and how these things are going to be solved. Thanks, Paul.
All right, well, thank you very much. We know there are more questions. The guys are here for the rest of the week, and if you want to tune into Gaia tomorrow, it's at 13:30. You can check it on the app on the schedule. But just let's give them a round of applause for the excellent panel. And thank you.
We're up first.
So we're going to invite the IAB up onto the stage. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. The IAB chair is going to invite the IAB.
I'd like to remind you that you outgoing members of the IAB have not escaped yet. We'd like all of the IAB incoming, ongoing, and outgoing up on stage at the moment. One member of the IB who unfortunately is not able to join us tonight is Robert Sparks. He's recovering from a series of surgeries, and we wish him the best and a speedy recovery, but unfortunately he's not able to be with us either in the room or online tonight. So, as you can tell, the IB is very concerned about queuing theory. Keep. And not so good at spread spectrum technologies eventually. Gabriel, would you start by introducing yourself?
Gabriel Montenegro, IAB.
Melinda Shore, IAB.
Hello, Joe Hildebrand, outgoing IAB.
Suzanne Wolf, cheerful and outgoing. Well, actually, staying IAB.
Jarek, IAB.
Heather Flanagan, not IAB at all, but RFC series editor.
Eric Nordmark, IAB.
Lee Howard, outgoing IAB.
Ted Hardy.
Alyssa Cooper.
Brian Trammell, IAB.
No? Jeff Tansua, IAB.
Christian Huitema, because you need more guys with a funny accent on the IAB.
Will share it.
Mark Nottingham, IAB.
Martin Thompson, white guy.
Alison Mankin, IRTF chair.
So the mic lines are open for your questions to the IEB, either in person or from our online guests.
It's Pete Resnick. And one that I am hoping what you say is, oh, that's the IASG's problem, ask them later. Be prepared. So a few months back, I sent the IASG a message asking about the state of the RFC series, who gets to be an author, who gets to be a contributor, who gets to be on the front page, who gets to be where, when, who, how. And they said, yeah, we'll think about that someday. Since the RFC editor is under your purview, is this a question for you guys, or because it's their stream, it's a question for them guys?
So the rules for that are made up on a per stream basis. So if you are thinking about a standards track RFC, it is indeed a question for them guys. However, I'm also going to turn to Heather because she has guidance in the RFC style handbook. Style guide, excuse me, on this point which many stream managers take quite seriously.
Many of them do. Some of them really wish they didn't have to and would love it to be my problem. But this is a stream-by-stream decision. Our guidance continues to be we'd rather see no more than 5 authors, or in this case, we're using the term authors fairly broadly. That can also be editors. There's a lot of logistical reasons for that I'm not going to get into right now unless you really want me to. We will start to question once you hit 7. We've mostly beaten the IASG into submission such that they'll often tell us in advance, yes, we know, we're sorry. But the RFC.
Let me short circuit a little bit, because the question is, can contributors who are not on the Auth 48, who are not necessarily on the front page, appear in the RFC editor's index so that they can get credit in ways that this community sometimes asks for credit for their publication? Because right now people and contributors do not, and they are required to both be on the front page and be in Auth 48 if they want that. And if the IASG insists that for their stream they want credit for people and the contributors, even if they don't appear in Auth 48 and even if they don't appear on the front page, will you fulfill that?
The last time that came up with the IASG, this is something I talk to them about annually because we have no memory. They were unable to reach consensus on that.
That didn't quite answer the question.
I think, though, that it means your question really does belong with the IASG if you wish to.
Ted, can I add one little thing? So some of the tooling that we have that lists authors does take contributors into account, and some don't. So there's always that.
So everybody is clustering at one mic. So clearly the interested people in the IAB were leftists, at least from the point of view of the IAB.
Maybe from other perspectives as well. Just a comment here, not a question really, since Martin kind of teed it up. So +1 on good plenary topic, I think it was interesting, relevant to this crowd. But maybe -1 on diversity. I mean, the topic we're talking about today, is an important one. But hearing it from three white guys was maybe not the best way to address it, as our Nigerian colleague pointed out. There's some different considerations when seen from different perspectives around the globe, and so it would have been nice to have seen some more diverse perspectives on a panel on this topic.
Thank you very much. We have a plenary planning program committee, and not quite all of the members are up here, but I believe they're all in the room. And we'll take that advice quite seriously. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Andrew Sullivan. At the DNSOP meeting on Monday, there was an interesting talk by somebody about ways that maybe that protocol had gotten away from us. And, you know, it occurred to me, listening to it, that this is another one of those protocols where we're always talking about ossification, and at the same time, it seems to be growing mostly bone spurs. And I wonder whether there is a thing that the IAB wants to say about that, or whether there are things that you think, you know, need to be done about any of these protocols that are at one and the same time critical, kind of in the middle of the hourglass, and at the same time growing hairs and bone spurs and other kinds of things that might turn into bone eventually, or stone or something else. Because I'm just nervous about this pattern being repeated, and then working groups, you know, still having to work on the protocols and develop them in ways that are, you know, responsive to the pressures of the internet.
As one of the perpetrators of the DNSOP meeting in question, I can say that the challenge there, and I think that was the outcome of the discussion, which would be worth reviewing, but I think what came out of that discussion in the room was not that this is a novel thought. And I think the challenge there, I would love to be able to come up with something new to say about this, about the architectural implications of aging protocols with many teeth and many bone spurs. And trying to come up with something to say about it besides, yep, it's self-evidently true, and we don't know what to do about it. I would welcome that, and now that you've pointed this out, I can go home and think about it some more, but so can anybody else, including the IAB, because I think you're right. I think that we have got to come up with we've been having that conversation about DNS, and there are probably other protocols we could have it about. And we're getting to the point where the infrastructure and the architecture is aging enough that we should be able to say something about that. And you're right, we don't.
I just wanted to point out that Colin Jennings gave a similar kind of talk in ART, in the dispatch meeting on Monday morning. So, you know, convergent timelines.
Phil?
Phil Baker. I'd like the IAB to further consider what expectations we have from users of the internet and how they're using it and how they expect it to affect their privacy. Now, the reason for that is obviously, you may have noticed we're currently approaching a constitutional crisis in this country as a result of people using the internet. And we're approaching weapons of mass litigation. And I think that, and one of the things that troubles me most when I'm reading comments on that debate is when people are saying, well, the users should have expected this because here on page 57 of the terms of service, they signed away their right to their privacy and all their friends' privacy. And so it was settled. And I think that we need to look at what our expectations of users' understanding of the technology is and make some sort of statement, because we are facing something that is going to be unprecedented. I mean, you don't do what the internet has just done to two countries without consequences.
Christian, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, There is a real problem that as the internet has grown into a big infrastructure for the society, it has changed. I mean, it used to be 20 years, 30 years ago, this wild conquest that we are making of connecting everybody, and we were very happy about that. Now we have to go to the next level, clearly. I mean, understand that we have this infrastructure, we have to make it better, we have to make it more reliable. Now, to Phil's point, there are clearly, I mean, our initial idea was, let's connect everybody, and, well, we've been pretty good at that. Now that everybody is connected, we might have to think about what to do to have everybody connected in a useful way. If you have ideas or specific action that would suggest, I'd be happy to organize that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, not all the conversations, but pretty much all the rooms I've been in this week, I think people have been thinking about this, and it's definitely on people's minds. The question is always, how can we help, and how can we affect this with what we do here? And this goes to a lot of conversations we've had about human rights and other aspects where we're trying to respect the users and trying to further the goals of the internet that we share, I hope, without taking a paternalistic tone or trying to do something where we don't have the expertise or the authority. And that's the balance that I think we're still searching for, is finding where we can make a positive contribution without taking responsibility for more than we can chew.
So just as a closing comment on this topic, I want to point out that ISOC actually hosts policy fellows at many IETFs, including this one. And one of the conversations that those policy fellows have is actually trying to understand the interplay between the social systems of their countries and the internet as a set of platforms. And I think it's very important that we continue that engagement outside of just the technical circles as we look at these problems, because it's quite clear that some of our own understanding, which might be based simply on how the packets flow or the pieces of information traverse the network, that's not actually capturing the whole problem as it's seen by other parts of the ecosystem. And so I really encourage everybody to remain engaged, not just with ISOC and its policy program, but with the policy and civil society folks, wherever it is you will go home to after you leave London. John?
Yes. Keeping in mind that I know we're already over time, I will try to be brief. But apropos of the bone spurs, the message I heard during that excellent talk was that stuff has gotten beyond the point where where the operators who actually need to use this stuff can understand it. And we have a problem here that we're sort of self-selected to be exactly the wrong people to evaluate that problem. I mean, because there are operators here, but they tend to be the most sophisticated, it's like, okay, what the ENS operators are, well, Google is here, and Cloudflare is here, and, NomCom, and the super sophisticated people are here, sort of the random, the random business that's trying to run a DNS cache on their, on their Windows box probably is not. Now, although I could say, oh, then we just need to get more operators here. You're like, that ain't going to happen. But I'm wondering, is there some way that we can figure out that we could, and perhaps with ISOC's help, figure out some way that we can go and poll the figure out some way to go and talk to the people on whom we will be inflicting our stuff, and try to understand better whether they'll be able to use it, and to perhaps slow down our wild enthusiasm for innovation and direct it more in places where it's going to get better uptake.
I think you might want to respond.
Is this a follow-up question or a
follow-up comment on that?
Okay, please.
Yeah, Darren Pettis, speaking as a network operator. As many people know, we brought a proposed internet draft forward on Monday. And it's, I don't want to go on and on, it's just that there's a dichotomy here between the need for privacy on the internet, which we completely understand, and a requirement by many operators to manage their networks. internal to the data center. And not being, an expert on these solutions, we tried to follow the process a little bit and come up with some proposed solutions. And I want to thank everybody that's been helpful to throw out different ideas of what can be done. I've learned a lot in the process. We would have liked to have had maybe an IB architectural board review or a board meeting for a couple of days to discuss it a little more and maybe understand the situation a little bit better. There's a lot of confusion out there on that. But that being said, the situation remains. I know we didn't come up with a solution that was agreeable at the time, which is understandable, so we have to figure out how we go forward. But as I say, the situation remains that we have to manage our networks. And we also want things to be secure on the internet. So where we go from here, I don't know, but just wanted to share a little bit with that, and if anybody has any ideas of better ways to accomplish that and get through that dichotomy, we're happy to listen.
So before I turn this over to Lee, who's going to be the first to speak for the IB, I just want to distinguish between two different problems, because I believe you've elucidated two different ones. One is a problem with management in the face of ossification, a set of systems which have gotten so difficult to configure because they're old enough and have assumptions built into them from 30 years of different sorts of use, that they're not usable in new situations or not extensible in particular ways. And then there's a different problem of innovation, where we have changed the working of the network in a way that may have an impact on those who use it or who operate it. And I think those are distinguishable enough that possibly we ought to treat them as two different items of inquiry. So when you answer, please be clear as to which one of those problems you're tackling.
I actually think that I'm being responsive to both because I'm talking more about our processes and the IAB activities, that we have been trying to do more outreach as the IAB and with the IASG. We spoke at a recent NANOG for DNS in particular. I don't know if there was representation at DNS OARC, but that's not necessarily the kind of operator you're even talking about when you're talking about a local cache.
Yeah, they're super sophisticated.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's a sophisticated crowd too. So I don't know how to reach out to small network operators. I know how to find Darren. I know where he's right there. But I don't know how to reach. I don't know how to reach people who manage a small network and don't go to conferences and may not read the same trade journals that I do. And so that's. I think that the I'm going to speak for the IAB since I'm leaving, and they they can't fire me. No, I think there's interest on the IAB in continuing.
We could make you stay.
I think there's interest in continuing to find ways to do that kind of work to make sure that we incorporate more stakeholders' perspectives as we're developing systems here at the IETF. And I don't think that's limited to the IAB. I think it's also represented on the IASG. I think we also need more suggestions on how to do that outreach and do so in ways that scale, because there are a limited number of us and hours.
Okay, so I'm going to cut the line at Spencer, since we are, as you said, over time. Spencer, what's your last question?
Can I just say one last thing, if I may? One idea was that it could be something similar to IPv6, where there's split into an operational side and a maintenance side, because it's very tough for non-programmers to come into a cryptographer session and try to come up to speed on what's going on. So if there was an operational side where they could look at the need and then maybe partner with some people on the maintenance side, that might bridge that gap a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Spencer Dawkins. I just wanted to follow on the Lee's comment a little bit and just say, I've gone to operator conference, gatherings also, but this last time at NANOG was a little bit different. We had like 6 or 7 people. We had an hour slot to talk about IETF stuff. We had at least 100 people in the room listening to us. It wasn't a plenary slot, but that was a lot. I'm thinking that I am sensitive to the part where those are not the right operators. I suspect that if we had the right the conversations with them, we might understand some things better, and they might have a better ability to flow stuff downstream to smaller operators than we do. So just to up-level and say, the IB and ISG both have members that are more intentional about contact with the operator community than I've seen in the last 4 years. And I would encourage the community to make sure that we're talking to them about the right things. It seems like this is a right thing that could be on our list, and I'm pretty sure that there are other right things as well.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody. The next group to come up for open mic will be the IAOC. So if the IAOC could come to the stage and the IEB could.
Look at it. I would have done it myself. I'll have a kick on this. You need to plug it in the other end somewhere.
Does it say? Oh, no, I haven't flipped it yet. There we are. So while the IOC comes up here, including the, yes, they're all here. So I want to apologize to Leslie and Tobias because I didn't invite them up here. I messed up the run of show, so I apologize to both of you. But Leslie is over here, Tobias is over here. We'll do the photographs with the plaques later just because we're running over time. But again, I want to thank them very much for their service, so thank you. And with that, we'll start over here, and people can introduce themselves, please.
Leslie Daigle, Escaping IAOC.
Ted Hardy, ex officio, IAOC.
I'm still Beyonce.
Still Alyssa Cooper.
Tobias Godrom, surviving IAOC.
Lou Berger, NomCom appointed.
John Levine, ISOC board, part of the IAOC.
Glandine.
Cover
Portia Wensdanley, IED.
Kathy Brown, ISOC and IOC.
I should note also, of course, that we are also the members of the IETF Trust, and Kaveh is the chair, so this is also the time for questions for the Trust, if you have them. And with that, we'll start here.
My name is Jian Hanyao. I concerned about the IETF registration fee increase. When I first joined IETF, the registration fee is around $500. Now, in next year, maybe around $1,000 US. Maybe after another 10 years, maybe $2,000 US. The IETF registration fee is the most expensive fee I have involved many internet-related meetings. So because my company sponsored me to join the meeting, so $2,000, $1,000, $500 US is no problem for me. But if we have more than $1,000 US, maybe we block some open source project manager or small companies to join because $1,000 US is much to them. Every year, maybe $3,000 US. So my suggestion is we maybe future do some survey. So what is the maximum registration fee that the IETF community can endure or accept? So I also suggest IETF use another financial source, look for maybe have a IETF discussion how to increase the financial revenue for IETF, but not only focus on the registration fee. If registration fee like the tax, more tax, maybe the community may be not happy. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
So I'll allow others to go first if they want. No, you see, this is what happens if you allow yourself. Okay, so. Oh. People are now struggling.
Actually, I have a, yeah, where'd Yao go? I mean, when this question comes up, I mean, first, I mean, the proposal our current, straw man proposal is to raise the price from $700 to $770. And one of the topics that always comes up is that nearly everybody travels from far away. So there's hotel costs and there's airplane costs, and which for most people, I think, are probably more than $700. So one thing I was actually planning to spring on us at dinner tonight was the possibility of tiered costs for local attendees, which I think might, which, well, I might as well finish putting my foot in it. We are.
The rest of us haven't heard about this.
Yeah. Well, no.
Please go on.
Okay. We're meeting in Thailand this fall, and this is the first time since we met in China that we are meeting in what would be considered to be a middle income as opposed to a high income country. And I could easily imagine there are people who live in Bangkok, and could get to the venue on the bus, for whom a $700 fee might be a deterrent. And we've had, and we in fact, it's not super well publicized, but in fact, you can ask for fee waivers. But but as we become more international, the fact that different people can pay different amounts will be an issue. And I think that particularly as, we're talking about satellites and community networks and stuff like that. I mean, to me, I think it's important that we encourage people to participate from countries outside of the kind of the traditional G8 countries. So I think, the actual answer to your question is, we are aware that raising the price is a problem, and the more we raise the price, the more we're going to scare people away. And we don't have all the answers, and to the extent that people can give us advice on how to do it better, I think we would like to hear it.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so while we are handing out the rope to hang ourselves, so let me do that as well. And as an outgoing IOC member, maybe I can be a little bit more relaxed about hanging myself, so you can hit me on my way out. So definitely in all the discussions we had at the IOC, we are always very cautious about increasing the meeting fee, so I hear you. We are still also faced with the challenge that Beyoncé raised before, between the gap of what we have as income and the gap we have towards the cost. There's a number of things that we can debate or discuss in the community. So one is, for example, can we get more sponsorship money or other sponsorship revenues? Should we expect ISOC to pay more? I mean, ISOC is already paying a lot more compared to some years ago, but maybe, I don't know. Yeah? Is there something to discuss about remote attendees? Should they also care some of that? These are all discussions, I think, for the community to have at some point.
The only thing I would say in addition to that is that we need to look at the financial picture as a whole. So meeting registration revenues is one source of revenue, but we also have sponsorships. And we're looking at some innovative ways to formulate those for IETF 103 in particular that John raised, to try and work with sponsors to help make it possible for more locals to attend. But there's lots of other ways that you could think about managing the proportion of the budget that is divided between sponsorships and meeting registration fees and the proportion that comes from ISOC. So I agree with the notion of sending us your ideas in that regard, but I think it's important to not look at it just in a vacuum.
And I'm going to cut the mic lines just in case anybody else has some bright ideas up here. Only the people who are standing are going to get hits at that. But the last thing that I will say about this is that, as I said in the earlier part of the program, we are not promising you this increase. This is a warning now so that you can budget for it just in case it comes, but that doesn't mean we're going to do it. And as you can already tell, we're going to have lots to talk about at our retreat in April, and we'll definitely be reporting back to you as soon as that is done about what we're thinking about. Also, if you have bright ideas about what we ought to be doing, please do send them to us, right? We want those ideas, so we're not foolish enough not to listen. All right, I'm going to go over here first and then come back.
Barry Lieba, excuse me, part of my voice didn't wake up with me this morning. I have a comment on the respectful behavior topic that Alyssa brought up earlier. Thank you for bringing it up. There's a point about it that I think deserves highlighting. We are often abrupt to each other. We're often rude, nasty, whatever on mailing lists or in person. And what I hear often in response to being called on that is they can take it. They're long-termer, they're long-time participants. We know each other. Or sometimes even, I really don't care if that person's a jerk. I really don't care if I drive him away. But we don't consider that there are 10 other people watching this exchange saying, I don't want to put myself in a position where I'm treated that way. And this is not just theoretical. I've had more than one person, I've had more than a few people tell me that they either left or didn't participate because they saw how other people were treated. So even if you think the people who are having this discussion are thick-skinned, it is affecting other people, and we need to not behave that way. Thank you.
So Barry, I think your point is well taken, but was there an action for the IAOC there?
I could have chosen either the IAOC or the IASG to make this comment to. I chose you. It's a comment, and it's something I think we all need to think about. So,
okay.
Please.
Kyle Rose. I want to call the IAOC's attention to a grave injustice, and that was the shortage of cookies, or as the English call them, biscuits. I'm just wondering what you guys are going to manage to do next time to make sure that there's enough sugar to keep us all, awake and working.
You have to talk a lot. You have to talk a lot faster if you're going to complain about cookies.
So I want to point out actually that the next time the IETF meets together, we're going to be meeting in Montreal, which is in Quebec, and Quebec is the maple syrup capital of Canada, and there actually is a strategic. There's actually a strategic maple syrup reserve in the province of Quebec. So I think that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that you understand the gravity of the situation, right? I mean, I was reduced to buying cookies with cash, like some kind of peasant.
We are sorry about the lack of cookies. I understand that there have been, on occasion, various views about this venue and the way that we interact with it. And I think that we will look seriously at this venue. There were, the last time, and I will say, I was on the IOC the last time when the decision to come back here arose. And cookies were on the list of complaints the last time too, and we thought we had ironed out many of those difficulties. My impression is that this venue has been better for us this time than last time. You may decide for yourselves whether that is an acceptable answer. But I recognize that some people have faced some challenges here. I will note that there have been some improvements in the food handling. It appears to me that there has been some effort to label things a little better, and I think that is mostly down to Mary Barnes. But I recognize that there have been some cookie shortages. Yes.
Quick plug. So the Secretariat sends out a meeting survey after every meeting, and while threads on the attendees list are useful for collecting ad hoc feedback about the venue and any other aspects of the meeting, the structured feedback that we receive in the survey is a really valuable source of information for us. It's really hard to make decisions in a vacuum about what we should do in the future. So if you have opinions about how you thought the meeting went or the venue itself, they tailor the questions specifically each time about particular things. Please fill out the meeting survey.
So I will note that I cut the mic line, so it better be really urgent. So you'll be fourth, please.
My name is Mukam Taman from Avrenik. First of all, let me begin by acknowledging that the financial sustainability of the IETF should always take a priority over everything else. However, at the same time, we do realize that technology very quickly takes up the character of the people that help create it, which is why I think the goal to have a lot more representation, geographical, racial, also gender is also important. And when we talk about the total cost of attending an IETF meeting, for a room like this, there's a cost that most of you don't ever understand, the cost of getting a visa. It could easily be as high as $500 to $1,000. That's for someone coming from, so very far off. So I want you to have those things in mind. So once you choose to raise the fees, please do consider what does that mean for your strategy to also have what? A lot more accessibility, because just the fees automatically is going to shut down a lot of people. A good rule of thumb is to just look at that, say, what is the average salary of the kind of person from, say, Africa or Asia that you would like to be here? Because if this doesn't get to the point where some engineer, say in Lagos or in Cameroon, decides, okay, I should be able to go to this event and pay from my pocket, then it's always going to be, locked out for a lot of people. And finally, I'm going to say, for some of the solutions, the answers are not going to be found in this room of self-selected people. Maybe the IETF, I don't know whether you guys are the right people, should think about sending missions where you go to the African Internet Summit, go to the Asia Pacific, and have working sessions. What can we do in order to make the IETF, make it possible for you to be more engaged in the IETF? I think the solutions are not always going to be found here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So just a couple of points in response. First of all, we are, I think, many of us very cognizant of the visa cost issue, and it's something that we talk about quite frequently. One reason why we rotate the meetings around to different parts of the world is to try and distribute some of that difficulty for people, so that while we acknowledge that not everybody can make it to every meeting, if the visa cost issue is prohibitive in some places, that it might not be in others, and fully acknowledging that that does not solve the problem for everyone from, with every passport, but it's one means that we've adopted and that we're actually trying to adopt as a consensus item of the IETF to try and spread some of this cost across the meetings over the years, so that if you can't attend one time, you can attend another time. And just in response to your second point, so the IETF itself is all volunteers. We can't send people anywhere because we don't really have the means to even cause people to come to our own meetings. ISOC does have programs that are involved in trying to get people to participate in the IETF and to do outreach in various parts of the world, and it's something that we could look at, that we do look at collaborating around. But for the IETF itself, since everybody's a volunteer, we can just ask people to do things. We can't make them do them, and that's definitely something that I at least experience every day of the job. Trying to get volunteers to do things is pretty challenging.
Lee Howard. Andrew, during your earlier presentation, you had mentioned that when we have a shortfall in the past, ISOC has covered that shortfall on an ad hoc basis, and that can't continue. And I wanted to ask why. I don't understand.
I think what I said, it's possible that I did say it can't continue. I think what I meant, in any case, is I'm not sure it should continue. I don't control ISOC's budget, of course, so I can't actually speak for what ISOC should do. But I control the part of, I don't control anything, to be perfectly honest with you. I barely control my mouth. But you know, I'm part of this body, and we have responsibility for our budget, and we're trying to stay within our means. You know, there is this danger that if we continue to rise, that we have the opposite problem of what we've just been talking about. That is, you know, our expenses start to get away from us. So we have to be careful about that. The final thing that I would say is, I am concerned about having this way of operating where we like come up with all the stuff that we want to do, we tot that up, we figure out how much money we got, and then we go to, you know, our parents and say, you know, can I have the car? I think that there's a certain responsibility to live within our means and to understand why our budget works this way. Some of this is structural. That is, we've moved some things onto the budget that were things that we were getting for free and not accounting before, and so there have been changes there. And this is part of the reason why I think the IOC has to spend a good, long, hard look at this and try to figure out exactly what's going on. But I would like to have a model for what our meetings are doing. And the fact that we can't really explain, we've got theories, we've got all kinds of explanations, people can come up with them, they're plausible ones, but I don't think we have a really good idea as to why the meeting revenue has been changing so much. And I think that if we don't have that, it's unreasonable for us to ask the wider ISOC community to just pay whatever it is that we managed to come up with. People are going to start to ask us, well, what are you doing with these unpredictable expenses? And I think that that's part of the reason. I don't know if Kathy wants to say anything more about the budget itself.
So I think someone said it earlier about taking a look at the whole of not just the business model as to who's supporting what, although we've gone through this a number of times, because there's basically three streams of revenue, right? Registration fees, sponsorships, and then the ISOC piece. And I think that's okay. I mean, the point is when you see this kind of strain on the way things are, it's worth looking at it across the board. I don't think there's any yes, no, or even maybe here. There's a desire by all of us to get hold of what the actual costs are, why, and I think while some of the costs got moved, I think it's really about the attendance. And I think that issue is one that deserves some attention because that's, I think you put it up on the slide, right? That's where you're seeing this gap. And so I think the collective thought was, well, it should be examined as to what's going on here.
So, go ahead.
Just to follow up on that a little bit, I think that the concern here isn't only about the money flows. It's about whether or not it's signal that what we're producing isn't of value to the folks who we're producing it for. And if the reason that we're having lowered attendance is because the online mechanisms have gotten better and remote participation is successful for people who might have previously come for one or two, that's not a statement of the value of the IETF, and it means that we may need to change the funding model to not be based on attendance over time. But it doesn't say anything as signal to the leadership or to the rest of the IETF about whether or not what we're producing is the right thing for the value needed by the ecosystem. And I think that the point Andrew was making before about this can't continue is really about it can't continue that we don't have a workable model of how what we produce and the value we provide maps to how people interact with the IETF. And developing that model isn't the work of just the IOC, it's the work of a lot of people, including everybody in this room that wants to be part of it. But I think it's important for us to realize that it's very easy to make up kind of post facto narratives about, well, this one turned out to be too far away, and that one turned out to be, yes, in Europe, but during the cold season, where the predictions were for Europe in the warm season. And you can come up with very easy explanatory narratives, but they're not a model. And I think we need to understand how to make predictive models of this that actually succeed. And if it turns out the predictive model for that says, hey, you're going to continue to produce useful, valuable things, but it's going to go to all online by the end of some particular time, then, you know, we've got to develop completely new funding streams that deal with that. That's okay. But we can't tell whether that's what's going on or applicability isn't where it was when we were in the midst of the RAI boom or the SDN boom or some other previous boom. And that's really, really important for us not to hide by taking it to ISOC and saying, make us whole.
Andrew, could I add one more thing?
So Leslie's first.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Thanks. So I actually don't want to speak to the why can't ISOC just pay all of it, because I think if you want to have that discussion, you need to go to the IASA 2.0 meetings. But I do want to speak a little bit more about this model question and some work that Lou has been spearheading in the Finance Committee to actually have a look at, well, what is the actual model of, as Pete Resnick calls it, or no, it's Elliot Lear calls them, gazindas and gazoudas, right? What are our inbound flows of money and what are our outbound ones? And the one salient thing that I would pull up here is that a decade ago or more, meeting fees covered more than the cost of the meeting, and now they don't. And that difference is largely a function of, it's not just our costs that are going up, but the costs of, you know, hotels and whatnot, and food, et cetera. So, it is a bit of a tricky business. It is challenging to get a picture of, you know, how does our financial model work, and how would we like it to? So I presume that the IAOC, when it comes back with a statement about whether or not it's raising meeting fees in the future, will also come back with a statement of, this is how our financial picture looks, and this is why we have to raise meeting fees, as opposed to getting more money from ISOC, as opposed to expecting to get more money in sponsorship. And last thought, just to show you just how squirrely this attendance thing is, and how it does tie with what is the work being done. When we were looking at the early numbers of paid registrations for this meeting, this one right here, like 3 weeks ago, it was the lowest curve ever. And it was, you know, we have all of the graph with all of the lines going up like this, and then this meeting was doing this, and it was like, it was going to be a sub 1,000 person meeting. And as you saw on earlier slides, here we are, 1,200 people, missed the prediction by 40 people. So some of this is just tricky, hard, and subject to new good work being introduced to the agenda.
So just one last thing as you're contemplating all this. I heard at least two of our colleagues from Africa talk today about the needs of people in those nations. And we hear at ISOC a lot of actual interest in people in the other part of the world where there is not an internet yet. That would be 40% of the world. That we're hearing from those folks that, hey, we'd like to create too. We want to be part of this. Part of what I wonder is whether there are new demands that we're not looking at that would be served in different ways that perhaps result in some different cost structures. And so I raise my hand saying, I sure hope as you take this issue up that that is part of the discussion, and that the testing what those new markets are for the IETF, I think would be really smart. I know that my last trip to India, all of everybody wanted to say, how do we get there? How do we do this? We can't get there from here financially, but why don't you come here? Well, are there other ways to actually attract more attendees? And so I would hope you would put that in your model now, or a new model. And I hope that would get in the conversation.
So I want to thank you all for all those comments and points. And I do think that looking at the value that the IETF offers to not just participants, but potential participants does need to be part of that model. And I hope that you will look at that probably with the IASG when you're talking about how do we make sure that we're actually providing value. And absolutely, as Kathy, as you just said, and we've heard, please make sure we can be inclusive, and that includes, financial inclusivity. Thanks.
All right, so there are two things. First of all, I have now run 2 mistakes today, so I got one more and then I'm fired. But I run 2 mistakes today. The second one was I did not, in fact, invite Brad and Ken here on to the stage so that you could see who they were. So if you would come up here now with the remaining people who are willing to do that, I'm going to ask you to come up here while you ask your 30-second question. That's you, Aaron.
Yes, excellent. Dear Beyonce, an email went out recently asking for input on a number of potential destinations for future IETF meetings. And I'm just back from a week in Bangalore, and while most of the days were very enjoyable, I have to say that it's a very different, as a business traveler, it's a very different experience. And so I guess what I'm looking for is a little bit of confirmation that this is not going to be ask for input, collect the input, make a decision, but there might be a little bit of chance for some dialogue, since I think that it is different enough from the standard work environment for IETF that it might be good to have a chance to talk about it if you're seriously considering locations for meetings that are so different from our current expectations.
So thank you for that, but I hope that you are sending such remarks to the relevant list, to the inbox that accepts them. And I also want to remind you that we have this new committee that is tasked with dealing with that input. And also, finally, that we do have an open mailing list, right? The IETF mailing list is open, and we can discuss those things there. But I think that it's very important that people raise issues about, what the differences are to that committee. We are not going to be able to solve the problem for everybody all the time, and I think that, raising the issues is important, but it doesn't mean that that's going to be definitive, and I'm not sure that we can decide meeting venues with 1,200 of our closest friends on a list.
That's a fair point.
Yes, please.
So, to the other tone of your question, one of the ideas of the meeting venue, BOF, and of reaching out to the community is that we want to reach out early in the process. This is not the last step, this is one of the first steps where we start contemplating about something so we can receive your feedback early. So see it in that spirit.
So I've now been the meeting review chair for I think about 28 hours. So how's it going so far?
How's it going so far?
So I will say, please send the feedback in through the channel we've established. It can be good feedback, it can be positive feedback, where you say good things about why we should go to that particular place that's been requested input on, as well as reasons why we should be concerned about it and we should maybe reconsider going to those locations. So it doesn't always have to just be bad stuff.
So if, first Ken and then Brad, if you can introduce yourselves very quickly, and then we'll hand the stage over to the IESG.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Ken Boyd, new to service to this wonderful organization, and I'm grateful to be here. And if I can help anybody, as you heard, my responsibility is sponsorship, so I'm happy to interact with anybody before I depart on Friday and even after. Thank you.
And hello, I'm Brad Biddle, I'm the new legal counsel. Really am excited also about being engaged. I have huge respect for IETF and everything it's accomplished, and it's kind of a daunting role to step into. IETF's had incredible legal support over the past number of years with George Contreras, so I feel like I'm standing on the shoulders of giants in one sense, because there's really been amazing work done. I really appreciate the warm welcome I've had, and really love the culture and the people of the IETF, and thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. With that, no, we cut the mic line some time ago, I'm sorry. We're going to invite the ISG to come up next, please. Thank you.
See you guys. What? No, that's not me. What? There's two chairs. There's another chair right there. There's one here. Yeah, sit down. Sit down. Who knows how long this could take? Are they good down there? Can you pass those? Okay. Time for the ceremonial passing of dots. Go ahead, pass your dots if you so choose. Dots plus some magic. So let's start down at this end, Spencer. Spencer, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Spencer Dawkins. I'm the outgoing Transport Area Director next year.
Ben Campbell, Continuing Art Area Director.
Alvaro Rotana, Routing.
Kathleen Moriarty, outgoing security area.
Ben Kaduk, Incoming Security Area.
Martin Vicor, incoming routing.
Aliyah Atlas, outgoing routing.
Warren Kamari, continuing ops.
Alexei Melnikov, continuing applications in real time.
Alyssa Cooper.
Suresh Krishnan, returning internet.
Ted Hardy, ex officio as IEB chair.
Terry Manderson, internet.
Mia Kulevind, returning transport.
Deborah Brungard, routing area.
Ignas Bogdanas, incoming operations and management.
Benoit Claes, happy outgoing AD ops. Adam Roach, returning applications in real time.
Eric Rasquilla, security.
Okay, the mic lines are open. I think I can speak on behalf of the ISG that we encourage all questions about space lasers, and we discourage all other questions. Keep that in mind as you go to the mics.
I refer my right honorable friends to the question I asked some moments ago.
Right. So, so we sent you a response, Pete, which indicated that we thought that the right time to come back to this discussion would be when the new format tools were a little bit further along, because we might be able to leverage them to address some of the issues that you raised. So we had a lively discussion about it, and there were kind of differences of opinion on the topic itself, but it seemed like that would be the right time to take it up again. What is this? Months. Months. Yes, months. Yep, we were just talking about how to phase the rollout on the weekend with the RFC editor. So, yeah. Go ahead.
So I stood up here last ISG, if you remember, and calling the IETF arrogant and how we needed to get the user community together. And I said I would take the responsibility to try to get the group together. And the group that we chose was ONOG because they were interested in talking to IETF people. So we had there was a conference call. I forward mailed to the ISG asking people to participate. I wasn't able to attend, so I have no idea if anyone was on that call. Can you comment?
Did we have folks from routing ops?
So Dino, I know I wasn't able to be on that particular call, but we have been having some conversations about seeing if we could ask some folks at ONOG to come either to talk at the routing area meeting or RTGWG and do a better overview of what's going on. And we are getting some work coming into the routing area meeting, working group, that is very related to what ONOG is doing. So I think we really need to continue and build that relationship.
So the plan was to get ONOG to come here in London. That didn't happen. The ONOG is going to be held in May, so let's us put our foot forward to get somebody there. So if anybody wants to work on it, contact me.
I'm planning to attend the ONOG meeting in San Francisco in May, exactly for this purpose.
Thank you.
Thanks. Tobias?
Tobias. So this is related to the NomCom comment that the pool of potential future leaders is relatively small. And first question, it's like one question, one sub-question. First question is, what do you think you're going to do about it? Because we hear this like every year that, oh, we are facing a relatively small pool of potential new ADs and so on. And the sub-question is, might it be one option, for example, to be more risk-taking in terms of choosing younger working group chairs with less experience to give them that opportunity to grow and learn and develop in our community?
Kathleen, go ahead.
So that's one idea, and I'm sure the new ADs will take that into consideration. The security area has done pretty well for the last few years, and so we've been trying to share with the other areas what we've been doing in case that helps others. Maybe it's easier for security, or maybe it's the mentorship. But we have paid attention to who asks, who's interested to eventually be an area director, and have tried to work with them on different opportunities, whether they're very young in their career, so we may only have openings for a secretary position for a working group, and then help mentor them into roles for working group chairs. And, you know, I could name several instances, but we have a pretty good pool of more than 5 people that are interested to do it, probably closer to 10 that are interested to do it either soon or at some point in time. So it does require outreach from the area directors. It requires mentorship and, you know, showing interest in building people. So I do hope that continues, and I know Ben and Ecker are interested to continue that, right? And we discussed who was interested so far and hope that the list grows. And we encourage through the sector as well.
Aaliyah?
So yes, we can do a lot in our areas, and obviously Alvaro and Deborah and I have done some of that in encouraging our chairs and appointing new people, but to pretend that this is isolated from the other industry effects and the consolidation that's happening in portions of the industry would be absurd. And I have to note that even when you look up at the IESG, we've gone in the 4 years that I was on the IESG from having essentially a completely full-time IESG to one where that is distinctly not the case. And so I feel that the concerns about finding and mentoring good leaders and encouraging the industry is even more critical than it appears, and it's not just those areas.
Spencer? Spencer had his hand up before you, Ben.
I always have my hand up. So just to follow on comment I was making from the microphone, I think at this point we're at reprogramming the Kobayashi Maru level of needing to think about things. Continuing to get up and say, boy, it would be great if there were more and more transport nominees for NomCom every year. For how many in a row? I mean, it's like we can do better than this. Having said that, this is not the ISG's thing to fix. I think it is the ISG's thing to make sure that we don't keep the community from fixing. And it's not the NomCom's thing to fix. I mean, they can ask for nominees earlier, and that would be awesome. But I think that we're reprogramming a simulator at this point, and I'm interested in talking to people in the community who have ideas about that. I'll just say this: for a couple of examples. We met with the working group chairs today to talk about changes to the way we schedule working group meetings and resolve conflicts between working groups and stuff like that. So the Secretariat got up and talked about stuff that we talked about with the Secretariat at the ISG meeting this morning. And there were probably 9 working group chairs that made really good suggestions that we had thought of, I'd say, to be generous, 3 of them. I think there's a lot of clue out there that isn't up here. And I think that might be very helpful for that part of the community that has that clue to be involved in this conversation. You will notice that everybody on this stage managed to figure out how to get funded to at least start their terms. That's not true for the rest of the community. So we were the wrong people to solve this problem.
Ben.
So I agree with pretty much everything that's been said so far. Excuse me. I wanted to go on to say that the art area directors and some of the chairs have had a similar discussion this week about how we can better grow our pipeline, because the pipeline has been pretty thin for some time. That's not just at the area director level, that's at the chair level and all the way down, where it's hard to find people that are both willing and capable of filling the roles. So that's something that we are actively looking at.
Okay, thank you. Stefan.
Stefan Bartsmeyer. I have a concern about the approval on Monday of the draft effects of pervasive encryption on the operators. The draft describes a lot of awful behaviors that some operators are practicing, and then states that encryption prevents them. And instead of seeing this as a good thing, the draft frames the problem as if encryption was a problem because it prevented all the sort of things that operators would like to do. A typical example is section 234, which describes HTTP header insertion in a HTTP flow when the operator adds personal information such as the phone number as a HTTP header, so the website at the other end can have more information. This sort also the draft says that this action, this specific technique, is sometimes seen as questionable. It's not sometimes seen as questionable, it's awful, it's bad. And if encryption prevents it, it's precisely what it was invented for. So I think that this draft sends a very bad message. It will clearly be read, once published as a RFC, it will be seen and described as going back after RFC 7258, and will be discussed and presented as if IETF went back on encryption.
Warren, do you want to address that?
So, I mean, as I'm sure everybody knows, this document has had a long and varied past. It's gone through multiple IETF last calls, and yes, there's a lot in it that doesn't make everybody happy. But what it is trying to do, and perhaps doesn't do perfectly, in fact, we'll say it doesn't do perfectly, is be judgment-free throughout. You know, the authors tried multiple times to remove any sort of judgment and just tried to be, these are things that people do, by the way, you should know about them if you're going to be running a network. I don't really know what more I can say on that, but I'm sure there are many other folk here who can.
Can you speak to the consensus?
Pardon?
Where we landed on the consensus text that might be a useful
I can find the draft, but I mean, we took the approval thing on Monday.
With the consensus bit set to no. That's part.
Yeah.
Can you explain the implication?
Yeah, and it's one of the very, very few documents that we've ever published that has the consensus bit set to no, which shows up differently in the boilerplate. So if you have a look in the data tracker, maybe that wasn't clear. If you have a look in the data tracker, it's got consensus no, so it has the different boilerplate on the front of it. Once it's published, it will have the different boilerplate on the front of it. So I don't think I explained that very well, but hopefully that helps at least some, or to alleviate your concerns, and I'm sure Kathleen has more.
Sure, and I'll keep it short. So this was a follow-on from RFC 7258, and Stephen, one of the authors of that, was the original sponsoring area director for this, and he also agreed it was a follow-on, because if you read the words of that document, it is also asking to find a balance and figure out what that balance is between network management and privacy, and to consider those controls. This was a very difficult document to work on because people needed to feel acknowledged in what they were being said, what they were contributing, and feel heard that these were real problems in their spaces, and there may be alternate ways to do these things. So I do hope that for areas where you are objecting to practices, that you help coach and provide guidance as to what should be done in ways that will be received well. Additionally, we addressed every single comment that came in. So if you didn't send comments in the many times that this has been out for review, we weren't able to address them. The other problem we ran into as authors is that everybody is biased. Everybody. Every piece of text that came in just about had some bias in some direction. So it was very difficult.
Spencer?
So I'm the responsible area director for Quick, so I've spent an entire IETF meeting talking to people about the spin bit in the halls. So I want to do real quickly two things. One is to say there's two things going on here. One is the way we ballot on informational documents. I had a fairly short but intense conversation with the ISG about that this morning, and that's continuing informal chats and retreat topic, I'm sure. But for us to be able to get the stuff out that needs to be out the way it needs to be out. And I think we actually made some progress with that with publishing the draft that we've been talking about. But I want to up-level to another thing and basically say that, we're talking about a problem that is difficult, it is a tussle, we have managed to not make it go away for a year, and I have no reason to believe that it's going to go away. So I think that this is the point where we need to be engaging with the community, and I think this is the point where we need to be steering, because we need to be able to do the right thing, whatever the heck that is, when we're talking about, gee, we have privacy concerns, gee, we have operational concerns. That's been really difficult. The IAB has had a workshop that tried to engage the wireless operators, and basically, this is hard, and that conversation hasn't stopped either. So I think, again, this is a thing where it's like, we need help from the community, and we need to be steering.
Aaliyah?
The work too, as I went deeper and deeper into it, it's really also a control issue between apps and management, and security kind of stuck in the middle. And
That's why you have the unicorn.
Right, so I know why she got the unicorn. But more seriously, this isn't something that the IESG needs to solve. This is something that we all need to solve as a community. This is a tussle. This is impacting the internet. This is impacting people out there. And it's a balance between, as Kathleen said, the endpoint and the network. And we've all had the arguments about dumb network and smart network since we were in, well, not preschool, I guess, but, at least college. And at the same time, it matters. And we also had that lovely plenary talk with David Clark talking about how one of the things we can do is wait and figure out how to make the stage of the tussle something that considers the ethics and the challenges that are ahead. So the question I have for you back is, how do you frame it? How do we pull consensus together out of the IETF? How do we get the work moving along that's needed? Because no matter how fervently we care about the ethics and privacy of the internet and internet users, at the end of the day, folks are needing to manage and run their networks and, frankly, make money. So we need to figure out how to balance the tussle and how to do the right technology to solve this. And that, I'm afraid, is not something that you're going to find up here because, you know, there's so many more brilliant people out there. Thank you.
Speaking about the judgment-free character of the draft, I don't think that it's a target in itself to be judgment-free. When it sees things like as awful as inserting HTTP headers with personal information or many other examples in the draft, we should not be judgment-free. We should clearly say that it's a bad thing, and if encryption stops it, it's good. For the same reason, I'm unhappy with the use of terms like balance. I mean, the priority is protecting the privacy of the users. The rest comes after. We don't try to balance everything. There are some things that are more important than others.
So as an author, I'm one of the security area directors, and there's countless drafts in the IETF that have been published during my term where I pushed for encryption to be required on those drafts. I have firm belief that it is helpful to have encryption. We are not going to reach end-to-end encrypted networks unless we address these problems and help people understand better ways to tackle these issues. So publishing a draft like this, in my mind, and it says it within the draft itself, is meant to be helpful to overcome these obstacles people have to deploying encryption. If you ignore them, they will not deploy your encryption, right? So this was hit it head on. Let's start talking about this and figure out how we can go forward so that we could have end-to-end encryption.
So yeah, I guess sort of a follow-on from that. Simply continuing to say that something is bad doesn't make it go away. And we spent a long time saying that NAT is horrendous, you should never deploy NAT. Didn't so much work out well for us. This document isn't saying that you should spy on your users. It's not saying that in any way. The tone, I believe, is these things are things that we need to realize exist. You need to understand that, you know, there are these middle boxes that do these sort of things. If you want to have an encrypted network or, you know, a network where encryption is ubiquitous, you need to understand that these things exist and that if you don't provide some other way for people to be able to do the stuff that they need to protect their network, they will just not allow you to deploy this. And, oh dear.
Wait, please. There's other people in the mic line ahead of you. Aaliyah, were you coming up again? Okay. So just an observation, which is that, as Aaliyah said, the responsibility for trying to figure out exactly what the precise thing to do here on a case-by-case basis does not lie with us. It lies with the community. I think if you review the extensive record of commentary about this document, you will find both your own view reflected and some of the views that the ADs to my right over here have been reflecting. So it's clearly a point of contention for the community. The same if you review the extensive mailing list traffic on OPS-AWG related to the ballots, right? So I think it's not a question that we're going to resolve here today, and it's not even necessarily a question for the IESG as a body to resolve. We made a group decision about what the disposition of the document based on, you know, many rounds of edits, but this is really not the end of the story. It's probably, you know, somewhere towards the beginning. I think we should move on if that's okay.
Are we going to change the subject? Or?
I'm going to move to this gentleman who's been standing in line extremely patiently for a very long time. And then I think I would like to cut the mic lines given the time. So,
Brett Jordan, I just want to publicly stand and thank Kathleen Moriarty for her years of service and her willingness to seek out and understand all sides of an issue. So.
Thank you. Go ahead, Phil.
Phil Hambaker. Yes, just echoing that. I was very surprised when Stefan said that the first and only priority is encryption. For me as a security person, my biggest priority is usually integrity and authentication. And for many users, access to their data If you've encrypted all their pictures of the kids when they're 5 and they can't get access to them, that's a much more serious loss to them than the fact that somebody else might have seen them. So whenever you are designing a security protocol, if you're not thinking about the balance of the user's concerns, you're failing the user. And one of the 3 things that has frustrated me so much is that I got into the internet because of PGP. And 30 years later, we're still not using end-to-end encryption. And that isn't the fault of the end users. The fault is in ourselves because we haven't yet given them the end-to-end tools that meet their needs, and we must understand their needs and address their needs before they will use our stuff.
Thank you. Harold?
Harald Aldestrand, seems I get the last word.
I don't know. I didn't mean to have you sit down if you wanted to be in the queue. So if it wasn't clear, it was cut after you.
Next, the last word.
Sorry.
a couple of points on which internet we built. Both universal access and this particular debate illustrate that we want an internet for everybody, which includes that we connect all the good guys and all the bad guys. And some of the bad guys run networks. So we got to admit that. And we got to say that that's a good thing. Because the internet is for everybody. However, I hope that the ISG will encourage in the future positions to be stated not only on what exists, but on what is good and what is bad, so that destroying the integrity of other people's data, whether it's HTTP headers or other things, is condemned as bad, even though we have to make it a separate document in order to do a separate consensus call on it. So I commend you for having gotten this far in describing what goes on in an internet that is for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks. Dino?
So looking at this problem purely from technical and not policy or moral or anything, I think it's a simple problem to solve. Every single packet on the internet should be encrypted. I'm looking at this as a technical problem, as a trade-off between privacy and network management. Every single packet on the internet should be encrypted. IP headers go in the clear, so network management at least has something in outer headers. They can't look at port numbers, but something has to give. They don't have zero management, they have IP headers, but every single packet on the internet needs to be encrypted.
You're volunteering to join the Quick Mafia, are you? All right. Thanks, everyone.